and to order the meeting of the Town of Pittsboro Board of Commissioners for Monday, February 25th, 2019. We start our meetings with a moment of silence. Thank you. Jay Farrell, would you lead us in the pledge?
Certainly. Everyone rise to the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
We have the agenda before us. The first motion I'll entertain will be that for the general agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the regular agenda? Second. Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson-Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. As to the consent agenda, there are just two items on the consent agenda. One is the minutes from last meeting. There is a couple of small corrections that are at your table tonight, and then a ordinance to declare a road closure, and there's also a supplement to that at your desk tonight. So is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Madam Mayor, I don't believe I have that update on this road closure. I got the ordinance.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
I would just like to pull that for a couple of questions.
All right, certainly. Can we have a motion on the minutes then?
Motion to approve.
Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. Do you want to do that now, Jay Farrell?
May I beg your pardon?
You want to ask your question now?
Certainly. I guess the first thing, I didn't, closing the road on Main Street for the farm to table dinner is a great idea, but I didn't understand exactly what was going on. We're closing the road 2 blocks, but what is it regarding? Who is partaking in it? Are we having open vendors? I have no idea what's going on.
It is a Main Street sponsored dinner, and it's going to be white linen, I believe, table for I don't know how many, maybe a couple hundred, 200 people in downtown Pittsboro with the lit holly trees and the courthouse as a backdrop for dinner.
And who is preparing the food? I mean, is it local?
Local restaurants.
It's a growing list.
Yeah.
It's still being worked on here.
And regarding police, and is that coming out of Main Street budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
That budgeted.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's all I had. Thank you.
And marketing is, I'm sure, going outside of Victoria and Scott County.
In that case, can we have a motion on the ordinance to declare the road closure?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson-Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. The next matter on the agenda is the resolution that we have tonight recognizing Black History Month. And I'll read. Whereas Black History Month is the observance of a special period to recognize the achievement and contributions of Black African Americans, and whereas it was initiated in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson as Negro History Week, and since 1976 it has been celebrated the entire month of February. And whereas this observance affords a special opportunity to become more knowledgeable about Black heritage and to honor the many Black leaders who have contributed to the progress of our town, state, and nation. And whereas such knowledge can strengthen the insight of all our citizens regarding the issues of human rights, the great strides that have been made in the crusade to eliminate the barriers of equality for minority groups and the continuing struggle against racial discrimination and poverty. Whereas Black African Americans have made significant contributions as the President of the United States of America in science, medicine, theology, education, music, sports, and public service. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Commissioners of the Town of Pittsboro that the month of February as Black History Month is the Black History Month, and urge all citizens of our community to give full regard to the past and continuing service of Black African Americans in our town, our state, and our nation. Adopted this the 25th day of February 2019. Is there a motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Moved by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Under our regular agenda, the next matter would be citizens matters. Before we start on the list of speakers, and there are 17 speakers, I would like to ask the board, you have in the past talked about whether we should hear people on matters that are on the agenda, and there has been an adoption at each meeting as to whether we wanted to hear from people who are speaking on current agenda topics. Is there a thought by the board about these 17 speakers?
I'd be in favor of allowing people to speak, but limited to the 3 minutes and sticking to that. Don't drag it on.
I'm also in favor of that, and just as Commissioner Foley indicated, allow the 3 minutes as indicated for our regulation.
Then we'll start with our sign-up list. Liz Collington will be our first speaker, and I'll give you the time. Thank you. Great. Good job.
Liz Collington, 390 Rocky Hills Road, Pittsboro. I'd like to address the specifics of the tree element, as the low percentages are not the only way these rules would work, and the actual tree coverage could be even less than it seems. To preserve more mature trees in open space, the element should require a much higher percentage and greater planting density for replanted trees. All development should trigger tree coverage with no exclusions, just like open space and park acreage requirements, either on-site or as part of a slightly larger development area. This totally new tree coverage planning area concept means that tree coverage doesn't have to be provided on a site or even with a development area through an offset of excess trees somewhere else, maybe not even close by. Only town and park gets to identify what that larger area is, and the town gets no say. The wording in Section 4G could mean that tree coverage could include undeveloped areas with a running tally as it's built out. Town and Park wants lower coverage in activity centers in Section 4, even though the boundaries and size of those are still unknown. In the past, with drawn small area plan, the activity center was 8.5 times the size of Pittsburgh's downtown vision area and included large office parks with plenty of open space. We also don't yet know what the boundaries of village centers will be. Dense urban areas will need trees, and lower limits should not be allowed for areas that remain undefined in size and design. Lower coverage for the area near Northwood is also not appropriate. This would be a major and early gateway to the development. To compete with other areas, it should feature more already mature trees, in addition to many more saplings. The very low 3% tree coverage for residential areas in these undefined village centers doesn't have to be provided in each subdivision, but can be averaged over all the residential areas throughout the village center. How permanent is that tree coverage actually? Tree coverage only has to be recorded on a final plat for a residential subdivision or for condominiums. That's in Section 4G. Not for any other type of development. This is not what earlier versions of this tree element said. Plus, in Section 11, trees can be removed and not replaced for multiple reasons, including for greenway easements or a large stormwater pond. Yet that area can still count as tree coverage. Existing specimen trees of fairly mature size get to count for double, so that where 10% is required to be somewhere, the actual area could be only 5%, and in residential subdivisions, the 20% requirement could be met by a mere 10%. A deciduous canopy tree of 1 foot diameter should not get double credit. The root zone to be protected from grading and construction is too small to ensure long-term survival of existing trees. Section 8 requires only a 1 foot radius for each inch of tree diameter, even if...
Liz, we're ready, thank you. If you want to submit to the clerk, it can be included in forward. Thank you. The next speaker is Tara Lynn Groff.
Hi, I'm Tara Lynn Groff. I reside at 504 Roberson Creek Road in Pittsboro. I am a certified beekeeper in the Master Beekeeper program for our state. And most people don't realize that when you see a honeybee, it belongs to somebody. Honeybees cannot survive in the wild anymore. And the amount of native forage that's in the area is insufficient to sustain them. As an example, with what's available here, I processed about 100 pounds of sugar last year to feed just 2 hives. A lot of people also have the misconception that honeybees feed only on flowers, but the native tulip poplar is the #1 source of nectar for honeybees in our state. And we also have sourwood and tupelo and lots of other trees in the area that offer a lot of different nutrients for bees. And right now the red maple are blooming, and it's the first nectar and pollen source of the year that motivates colonies to raise their brood. It's also pretty competitive because North Carolina has more beekeepers than any other state, and coincidentally, the main benefit of pollinators, of bees, is their pollination. And our state's #1 industry is agriculture, and Chatham County's #1 industry as well is agriculture. So considering depleting the annually occurring native forage in the area when it's already a critical time for our pollinators could have some severe economic damage on our county. I also am concerned about the habitat for bald eagles in the area. The Jordan Lake area is home to one of the East Coast's largest populations of bald eagles, and they are not just limited to the Jordan Lake area. They run up and down the Haw River watershed. I just saw 2 right off 64 by the Ag Center. I was driving over here for the meeting, and I've seen them at Town Lake Park as well. There is a federal law in place that prevents anyone from coming within 660 feet of a bald eagle nest, and that's primarily to prevent any human action over there, because if the mother eagle senses any human activity, she will abandon the nest even if there are eaglets in the nest. And if eaglets are mature enough to sense danger, they may not be mature enough yet to fly, and they will also try to leave the nest, and that's about 90 feet above the ground. Not the greatest outcome. The other item I wanted to leave with you is that our state has not recently just recognized the importance of pollinators. The Honeybee Act of 1977 declared that it is of public interest to promote and protect the bee and honey industry of our state. And I hope you consider these when you make your decision, and I look forward to hearing your decision as well. Thank you.
What was the spelling of the name?
It's Tara Lynn Groth, Groth, his last name.
Thank you very much. Kathy Holt.
First, I just want to thank you for being willing to listen to us. My name is Kathy Holt. I live at 680 Providence Church Road in Pittsboro. I've had a business here, a yoga studio, for 20 years. I understand that change and development is inevitable. I do. I get that. I also understand that intelligent, sensitive leaders can impact the lives of their constituents so much. If you are persuaded to let Chatham Park develop with less than our current 50% tree canopy or 30% in the commercial areas, then you will be changing this county for the worse for generations to come. The beauty of our county is one of the reasons many of us came and many more want to come. Look at Farrington Village. It's a large development, but they kept much of its beauty because they kept many of the large trees. Those trees are keeping our air cleaner, holding the soil in place. You can't replace large, glorious trees with Bradford pear saplings 2 inches in size without changing our county in such a negative way. Chatham Park needs to keep a large tree canopy, or we will no longer have shade, habitat for wildlife, or water retention from runoff on thousands of acres of Chatham County. Do you want this to be your legacy? You guys, your legacy. You are the leaders and decision makers in Pittsboro, but our whole county is dependent on you not caving into Chatham Park's demands. If you make the wrong choice, it isn't likely that we will ever be able to turn back the clock. Those trees will not be back. Development can leave our county a warm and inviting place, or it can turn it cold and sterile. Take a look behind Bojangles. Does that look inviting to you? Pittsboro can be developed in a way that has sensitivity to aesthetics, or in a way that makes the most money for developers. It is so crucial that we do this right. And the Haw River, our beautiful river here in Chatham County, it's fragile, and the town's dependent on it for water. Please insist on a 2,000-foot buffer along it. I don't know the words to express to you how important it is that you have vision and backbone that we will all applaud one day. People in this room and in this county now will applaud it. Generations to come will be so affected if you show us that you have that vision and backbone. Please be wise when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Mira Bukala. And after Mira is Jan Berger, if you think your way up.
Hi, I'm Mira Butalia from 55 Fort Hatley Road in Bynum. I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and for your work as commissioners. I'm a Northwood High School student here to speak on behalf of my peers on the issue of Chatham Park's inadequate tree protection elements. For the past week, members of Green Club and I have been spreading the word about the 10% tree cover that Chatham Park is proposing. Students are unhappy with the plan for tree cover that would leave Pittsboro with the least tree coverage of any city in North Carolina. This is our home too, and the lack of environmental protection that Chatham Park's proposal provides for Pittsboro and our surrounding waters is concerning. Trees not only provide a natural recreation area, but perform important ecosystem roles like maintaining and improving air quality, preventing soil erosion that leads to water pollution, and providing a habitat for wildlife. The economic benefits that come with a large development are not worth the costs of inadequate environmental protections. The current plan will result in long-term economic and environmental costs through harm to our natural capital and resources. Development that ignores the bounds and constraints of the environment is not sustainable, and sustainability is key to providing a future that my peers and I want to live in. To showcase our opposition to the tree protection additional element, over 200 Northwood students have signed a pledge to vote in the 2019, 2020, 2021, and future Pittsboro elections, and to stay informed about the environmental protections or lack of protections that the Pittsboro Board of Commissioners decides to enact. The number of Northwood students pledging to vote grows each day. Consider the voices of your youngest voters, as we are the ones who will have to deal with the long-term impacts of Chatham Park's development. Please, vote no on Chatham Park's tree protection additional element and require a process that protects our trees, water, and air quality.
Thank you.
Hi, Jan Berger, 726 Bynum Road. I want to thank you all for your hard work as town commissioners and as mayor. Digging through the complex issues put before you and listening to everyone's concerns must feel like an endless task, so thank you. I wrote to you a month ago with my concerns about the proposed tree coverage ordinance for Chatham Park and how it did not preserve enough of the existing forest. I've been mulling over what I said and realized there was something that I left unsaid. To be honest, I've been in a rough place in my life lately. I've been wrestling with what I should do about our rapidly changing world. The climate crisis has been very personal for me since I have a 4-year-old daughter and I'm constantly worrying about what the future will bring. I think we've all heard of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that says we need to drastically change the way we live now in order to avert disaster. And it leaves me wondering what I or anyone can do. This last December, I actually decided rather than go on our yearly visit to see our family up north that I would stay home. Flying, I've read, is one of the worst things we can do to add to the buildup of carbon in the atmosphere. I felt bad not going to see my mom, and at the last minute I changed my mind, but rather than flying, I ended up dragging my wife and kid up to New England on a 24-hour train trip and back again, because trains are supposed to be better than planes in terms of emissions. And it isn't comfortable trying to sleep in a train seat, especially when you know you could have been to Boston in 2 hours, but I felt like I have to do something, so if not me, then who's going to do it? And what should we do? Save the rainforest, right? Trees are the lungs of the world, and one of the largest absorbers of carbon on Earth. My daughter's school is collecting money for the rainforests in Brazil right now. In our house, we have a quarter jar, and she puts in a quarter every time she puts the dishes away from that she can take back to school. It's easy to say those people in those countries need help, or they need to stop doing that. But it's happening right here in Chatham County. The standard building practice in our area has become clear-cut and level. Then plant back whatever saplings are required. It's perhaps what is easiest in the short term and what makes the quickest money. But it doesn't need to be done that way. Houses can be built while minimizing the impact on the forest. Neighborhoods can be made within natural habitats. Roads can be laid while still protecting the river. All over the earth, forests are being cut down. We can't save them all, but this little part of the world is our responsibility. This is our chance to make a difference. I live in Bynum, right across the river. I don't get to vote in Pittsboro, like you do. The historic village of Bynum is almost 150 years old.
Excuse me, Jan. I'm sorry we are out of time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Hadley, you're next, and Martha Jill. Pronunciation of your last name?
Rowan.
By the way, as Ron makes his way to the podium, let me say that I've only been mayor for 3.5 years, but I don't believe there's ever been an issue that we got quite so many emails. It was a very thorough and complete communication.
And thank you, Mayor, and members of the Board of Commissioners. I did give to Mr. Bonnets a photograph. I'd like for if he could send that around so that you can see it. And Mayor, I practice down to 3 minutes as best I can. I would respectfully request the board in their search for due diligence and transparency to further examine the tree element and withhold approval until such time as all matters are sufficiently answered. There currently exists a resolution for tree protection, and citing those legals, that's Section 168, 385-1, Section D, Item 4. Nothing in this section shall prohibit the city from revoking the original approval for failure to comply with the applicable terms and conditions of the approval or the zoning ordinance. Wow, that gives you some power. But along the frightening part of that, after the approval of the site-specific development plan or phase development plan, all successors to the original landowner shall be entitled to exercise such rights. On May 3rd, 2018, the State Division of Water Resources sent a letter to the town of Pittsboro saying that they needed to follow the mitigation strategies for new development north of Highway 64 for great protection for the Haw River, especially wider stream buffers and enhanced stormwater management. Pittsboro had committed to these strategies in the environmental impact statement that was part of the 2010 wastewater permit. Chatham Park investors in the town of Pittsboro sued the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality in the OAH after the agency notified the town of failures to fulfill commitments made in the Pittsboro permit. The application to expand its wastewater treatment plant to accommodate new development. The decision, as I understand it, is still outstanding. Could Pittsboroughs have their permits pulled, lose possible state revenues, or be unable to issue bonds for wastewater management in defiance of the environmental impact statement? Chapel Hill is a city about the size of the population of the planned Chatham Park, 60,000 individuals. Chatham Park's tree coverage requires 30 to 40% tree coverage for all new development. Yet Chatham Park tree protection cites the Durham city regulations. Struck from the original plan is the words, the preservation and maintenance of tree coverage, also referred to as tree canopy, and the provision of replacement of tree coverage on development sites in Chatham Park. This was struck from the original document. This, I feel, is the very heart of the tree protection.
Ron, I'm afraid time's up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Martha?
Hello, I'm Martha Girolami. I live in Northeast Chatham, and I have been a witness to what's going on in Western Wake County, where there's almost no tree coverage in fairly big developments, just big oceans and level of dirt and a few little trees in the perimeter. And this has gone over and over in Western Wake, and it's coming into Eastern Chatham. Okay, back to what I wanted to tell you, and I have sent my email to you already. 10, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%. These levels of tree preservation in a forest is deforestation by any measure. We decry the deforestation of the Amazon, but allow deforestation at home in subdivision and commercial developments all across North Carolina. The Board of Commissioners must have heard that there is a climate crisis going on. The climate crisis has arrived and is now destroying food production, human health, plant and animal life, housing and infrastructure, water resources, clean air, and many other things. So what is this Board of Commissioners going to do about climate crisis? That is the screen. Humans can't keep living as before. Forests, our trees, and their protected ecosystem must be preserved as our contribution to stopping greenhouse gas emissions. Every one of us must stop what we're doing. We must live by a new set of rules. The rules must minimize and end harmful greenhouse gas emissions. We have heard the cry, keep fossil fuels in the ground. But don't forget the entreaty to stop cutting down our forests. Keep trees alive. You know the reasons. Trees are carbon storage banks above and below ground and give us tremendous biological services. The Pittsboro Tree Ordinance must preserve a minimum. Preserve the trees that are, the big trees that are there, 50% of them, of the existing trees. Otherwise, you are participating in climate denial and inaction. As Greta Thunberg, the Swedish youthful activist, said to adults, we have to unite behind the science and act as if our house is on fire when it comes to climate change. Ideally, there will be no Chatham Park, since it is sited against our vital Haw River and Lake Jordan. Also important is that Chatham Park is deaf to climate change and in denial over their environmental damage. Already, Chatham Park has polluted streams from the small amount of construction it has done. In future, Chatham Park project is on track to release millions of tons of topsoil into both water bodies as they scalp the land, flatten it, and fill it. Existing stormwater rules are weak and ineffective for proposed land disturbance and tree removal of this scale. The IPCC warns us that rich countries must drop greenhouse gas emissions to zero in 6 to 12 years. This BOC must do its part in reducing emissions by adopting greater than 50% tree preservation. This is not a sacrifice. It is survival we are talking about. Ask yourself, if Pittsboro won't do its share in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then what town or community will?
Our next speaker is Bayla Hannock. And Amy Kaufman is right after that.
Hi, Bayla Munich from 319 Wrights Way. I'm going to start off with an image or a comparison. So if only my arm was covered in skin, which is about 10% of my skin, here's what would happen to my body. My organs would fall out, just like the soil will erode if this land is clear-cut. I won't be able to produce many of the vital nutrients that I receive from the sun that are processed by my skin, just like this land won't be able to sequester carbon dioxide as well and won't be able to produce oxygen. I won't be able to regulate my body temperature, just like Chatham Parks will have to spend more money on energy sources to cool the town when the shade is gone. I will be more vulnerable to pathogens and just like the town will be more threatened by water pollution and sediment. The helpful microorganisms in my body will die, just like the animals in Chatham Park that will be losing habitat, they won't have food, and that are threatened by this displacement that is forced upon them. Even with a 10% skin cover, my whole system is vulnerable and will not be able to function and will perish. I give you this image because we need to start thinking about nature as part of us. Stripping the space of almost 90% on average of this ecosystem is stripping the human population of something that's so valuable. We are estranged from this natural world, a world which we are meant to be part of, not destroying. And you cannot accept continuations of the toxic cycle of destruction, carelessness, and minimal investment in the health of a habitat we share. We live with beetles and salamanders and lots of deer, as everybody probably knows. And we need homes just like they do. But our homes are not homes if they're destroying theirs. I'm going to Brazil for 4 weeks this summer to work in the Amazon on ongoing conservation projects. And to fund my trip, I've been babysitting and nannying a few families. And all of the kids that I've been babysitting are growing up in communities that value tree cover, that have been taught that's important to the world and important to human culture. And if there is a whole new generation of children that will be growing up in Chatham Park without this tree cover, then they're not going to know what the importance of this ecosystem is. Sustainability is setting an example as leaders, and you're our leaders, for the future generations. And while these Chatham Park kids might have trees, they won't have a healthy ecosystem, and they won't have an understanding of what it means to be a conscious member of this earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Amy Coughlin. Experts say we have 12 years to act and avoid catastrophe. Some also say it's too late. We're at that point of no return. Either way, it is clear climate change is an extreme threat to our civilization, and the problem gets worse each day we continue with business as usual. Do we give up and get so overwhelmed that we do nothing? Absolutely not. We prevent it from getting worse than the unimaginable. This means drastic global change from the current destruction of our planet. But where do we start? Right here in our own home. It not only impacts the larger global picture, but it also impacts our immediate environment, our health, the health of the land, wildlife, and resources around us. I know I don't need to tell you about the importance of tree conservation and the impact of deforestation on climate change and the ecological system. But what makes Chatham County special is the number of trees and abundant wildlife, including in and around Jordan Lake and the Haw River. As Chatham County develops, this is an opportunity to do it responsibly and think long-term and in a sustainable way that respects our ecosystem. I live in Briar Chapel. I believe Briar Chapel is 1/10 the size of what Chatham Park will become. I can share a number of examples of environmental injustices that are happening in our own community. I've been living there for 6 years, and we've been fighting with that builder since I've been there, that developer. I'm going to quote Greta Thunberg, who's a 15-year-old from Sweden who spoke to the world leaders during the UN Climate Change Conference in 2018, because I think she says it much better than I can. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas. You get us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell us like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. Sorry, I get emotional.
I have children too. And I think other people have said, what does this mean for our kids? Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity for a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. You may say you love your children above all else, and you're stealing their future in front of their eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done rather than what is politically possible, there's no hope. We can't solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. If the solutions to the system are so impossible to find, then maybe we need to change the system itself. My husband and I are business owners in Chatham County. For me, we do everything we can possible to try to reduce our impact on the environment. It's not profitable for us to do that, but it's morally important for us to do that. And I hope that we can do the same with these developers. Thank you.
Audrey Schwanko is next, and followed by Tammy Sherman.
Good evening. My name is Audrey Schwankel, and I live at 1285 Thompson Street. And I came here tonight just to say a few words about trees, because I live on 100 acres of trees that are not going to be cut down, and that we have promised that to the trees themselves, that they would not be cut down, and feel that they're very important that they remain. We are very concerned about young people. We have children, 3 children. My husband, Jimmy, and I have 3 children. We've also been foster parents for 21 children. And all of those kids have benefited from those 100 acres of trees. 3 words: inspiration, respiration, and protection. Inspiration, we've all been inspired by books about trees. I had to memorize a poem as a kid called Trees by Joyce Kilmer. I can still remember the first 2 lines. I think I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. Our kids need inspiration by trees. Too many kids are sitting with their phones and they're not being inspired by trees, and they're not seeing enough trees. And if you don't see it and live with trees, you will not try to protect trees. We need to keep our trees in Chatham County for that reason. Last year I taught at Northwood. I was an ESL teacher at Northwood, and I was teaching with a biology teacher and learned the intricacies of respiration. Not just our respiration as human beings, but trees' respirations and photosynthesis, and how we live in a symbiotic relationship with trees, where they are providing us oxygen and we are providing them carbon dioxide, more than they need. We need that respiration. We need the trees to stay and be our lungs. I don't understand how a few people can buy 7,000 acres of land and take away the respiration for all of us in the community. Those trees are being cut down, and those trees are doing work for the entire community, not just for those acres of land. We need to all have a chance to breathe good air, breathe air that 7,000 acres of trees are now not going to be able to respirate. And protection, of course, in climate change that's coming. And according to the person who just spoke, 12 years remain for us to get serious about this. But according to NC Warren, we have 2 years. 2 years to be able to begin in a serious way to protect ourselves from chaotic climate change that we're already seeing.
Your time is up, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all your work. Thanks for listening to all of us.
Good evening. I'm Tammy Schwerin, 4479 Pittsburgh Moncure Road in Moncure, and I also own the industrial park on Lorax Lane, which is a great name. I've been here 30 years, and many of you know Barbara Laurie. She would be here tonight, but she is at the end of life. She's 93. She's a dear friend and mentor of mine. She's responsible for our recycling centers and our bicycle lanes and for protecting this county. and on and on. She's one of the many people that has spent time protecting this county and making it incredibly special. So special that Chatham Park's bought 7,000 acres, and I just want to say welcome, and that's wonderful, and that's great. And it's time to be good stewards of that land, and you commissioners can help them be good stewards of that land by, making the strictest policy we have on the trees. We can be better than Chapel Hill, and better than Charlotte, and better than New York City, and so I think it's all important, and please vote the strictest policy you can.
The next speaker is Tracy Turner Henson, and following her will be Herman.
Hi, I'm Tracy Turner Kaiser. I live at 495 Turnkey Way, Pittsburgh, just outside of the city limits, so I don't get to vote for city things, but I do think that the trees are extremely important. I'm concerned with all the clear cutting that's happening around and questioning why that is and how it is that we're not being proactive in protecting our community and the trees that are there. And as everybody has said, I'm not going to repeat, it's kind of like all of that on top of what needs to take place. So wanting to just put a face to you guys and be able to sort of say, how can we help each other out? How can we make Pittsburgh and Chatham County kind of the most special place to live as it is? Protect Fall River, protect the trees, protect the community, and keep keep it a place where children want to grow, where we want. I moved into this area from Massachusetts because it was a really amazing place 25 years ago, and it still is. But I see a lot of industrial work happening that I think we can slow down and think about 5 to 10 generations ahead as far as what that could look like and how we can improve it. So, thank you very much for what you do, and since you hear everybody, I know hopefully you'll vote the way that we'd like to hear you vote.
Thank you, Tracy.
Good evening. Thank you for being here in this, to you and to all of you. My name is Herman. I come to you from organizing my life in such a way that I may live in the forests across this great, splendorous green country. I choose not to have an address because the only thing I identify with are the deepest, solitary miracles that one encounters when one finds the thriving heart of a forest and 3 streams converge and form a cavernous waterfall. These miracles are not to be replaced by anything beyond this side of the digital meridian, beyond our concrete and tar and our rebar. There is no substitute. Any 3-dimensional rendering we may offer our youth is an ersatz replacement to the true beauty of the universe that exists so close. The true beauty that exists just south and east of where we stand, that we may tonight go and safely look at the passing clouds in front of the moon from beneath the ramage of the most beautiful manifestation of life this world has to offer. There is a level of immediacy that is the opposite of immediacy. There's a level of immediacy. I don't identify with our species. I speak very rarely, and I think very simply. And while the facts of pollution, of water runoff, of zoning are all viable, I believe that there is a more empirical argument to be made. I believe it is as simple as 1 times 3 is 3 times 5. I believe that because these forests have happened, that is how the universe tends. I believe that if there is space, space tends to be the universe. I believe that if there is, then there tends to be space. I believe that if there is, there tends to be a beech tree. I believe that if there is, there tends to be a sly fox that has memorized a map of dells and hidden valleys and secret corners so that it can go and be happy and raise its young. so that it can go around and inspire us to be more, I won't say godlike, but all like with a capital A, because that is the truth of this world. Those of you who would stitch the very truth of the continuum of existence with tar and rebar realize that you wield divine power, the power to unmake the continuum of existence. Please do not be such cruel, tyrannical ambassadors of our species to all.
Chairman, thank you.
Jessamine Hyatt. And after her will be John Wagner.
Mayor and Commissioners, thank you for another opportunity to speak to you about my concerns about tree protection in Chatham Park. Before I begin my prepared comments, I also wanted to thank you for passing the Black History Month resolution. I wish I could stay for the rest of this meeting, but I'm on my way to a Black History event in the library tonight. If anybody else wants to go, it's happening now at the library. So I just wanted to say something about tree protection during construction. On that line, I encourage you to look into design build firms such as Durham's Ellen Castley Architect. I don't know anyone associated with this firm, and I'm not advertising for them. I simply heard about them when I lived in Durham years ago, and I was impressed when I walked past lots they were developing to see houses spring up among the trees. No clear cutting, no scraping beyond the footprint of the house and the means of access. So I mention this only to point out that others have already pioneered low-impact methods of development, and Chatham Park must be held to such standards at a minimum. I know that a set of recommendations for Pittsburgh to implement a tree protection ordinance was already researched and funded and written years ago. I believe this document was in your packet maybe last month. So you already have this document in your hands, and I urge you to implement it or to seek an even stronger example from one of our neighboring towns, which I think many people in this room would be happy to help you identify. The ordinance needs to be written by those elected to represent the people of this town and county, not by those seeking to make a profit on development. And that's why I urge you to urge you not to vote on the proposed element tonight, or to vote no until it meets a far higher set of standards. And speaking of elected representation, I live in Bynum. I mentioned this when I spoke here 2 weeks ago, where I and my neighbors are going to be extraordinarily impacted by Chatham Park development, and we have no vote in the matter. All we can do is come here and speak and implore you to listen to us. I have heard that a member of your board has asked why it's okay for Bynum to be built so close to the river and not Chatham Park. Let me point out that Bynum is a historic village built almost 150 years ago. Mistakes were made then that should not be repeated. Chatham Park is supposed to be a forward-thinking development, not a backward-looking one. So, in that spirit, I would like to invite any of you commissioners or Mayor Perry to come have tea with me at my house on one sunny afternoon in winter while the leaves are off the trees, so that you can look with me at Chatham Park land across the river from my kitchen table. I would like to get to know you better, understand what motivates you to do this probably often thankless work, and to show you my appreciation. And I would also like for you to know me better and to understand how I will be impacted by this, though I have no vote, and how Pittsboro is nonetheless my address and my home, and I care about its future. So I'm just going to give you my card.
John Wagner, and following John will be Darrell Smith.
Good evening. My name is John Wagner. I live at 210 Jessamine Lane, Pittsboro, North Carolina. And the climate is in a crisis right now. And trees are a critical part of helping us get out of that mess. I encourage you to stop thinking about just the trees at Chatham Park, but start thinking about the forest. Because trees standing alone aren't what we need. We need contiguous blocks of forest. So I encourage all of you to postpone the vote on this, to look into this further. Don't make a decision. This is too critical to rush. Please think this through, gather more information, talk to experts, and postpone any decision until you can make it right. The future depends on it. Thank you.
Sarah Smith is followed by David Turecki.
Hi, Sarah Smith. I live off of Russell's Chapel Church Road. Mayor and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate your thoughtful consideration. Chatham Park developers have looked to tree protection ordinances in neighboring cities such as Durham for guidance on allotted tree coverage. Durham calls for 10% coverage, so Chatham Park calls for 10% coverage, which seems reasonable, right? Well, Durham has found that their tree coverage is lacking. One example of this, the City of Durham, as part of their Trees Across Durham initiative, has implemented a plan to plant 10,000 trees over the next 7 years. This is estimated to cost the city as much as $1.25 million. This is a substantial outlay for a medium-sized city. Clearly, they deem tree coverage a worthwhile investment. I highlight this point for two reasons. The first, Chatham Park is already falling behind other cities in terms of their tree coverage. They seek to compete with neighboring cities and towns to be a more attractive and inviting place for people to live, work, and play, yet the current tree protection element does nothing to set Chatham Park above and beyond the neighboring areas. Second, Durham is not special. I grew up in Durham, and it's dear to me. I've seen that city grow and change immensely in the past 20 years. But they are not an exemplary city of sustainable development. So why is Chatham Park comparing their standards to that of a city that is average, when they should be looking to the standards of the most cutting-edge sustainable developments throughout the country? Why are they looking to developments that are status quo, and still they're barely keeping up? But it's more than just these mediocre percentages for tree coverage that I have serious concerns about. This document is full of loopholes that give the developers immense latitude to clear forests without regard to its broader impacts on the rest of us, and to replant as it conveniences them. The proposed tree protection element does not show the thoroughness required to be a meaningful standard. It does not meet the touted values of Chatham Park's own developers, and it certainly doesn't meet Pittsboro's standards for our own future development. I urge you, as the voices for all of us in this town, to send this plan back to the drawing board. We want a standard of tree coverage that is truly exemplary. Thank you.
And finally, David Del Vecchio.
Thanks for the time again. Probably just say something very brief. I'm not sure. I feel like I need to say a little bit more than be brief, but usually the limelight's not what I'm really looking for. But I want to respond to Kirk, who was here a couple weeks ago. I don't know if he's here today. But there were some numbers that were thrown out in contradiction to the folks that were throwing out. There are the numbers that he was trying to defend as the developer. So I did a little homework on his numbers. First, that he was talking about by the end of it, he said there'd be about a 50% tree coverage or more, and that's not counting the street trees, which are apparently not included, according to him. I don't know. I looked on the tree preservation area plan in the document for Mosaic's Chatham Park Tree Coverage Plan, 8th edition, dated 7/2/18, a document from the August meeting of that year. It says 12% on Mosaic, so I'm not sure where 50% comes from. He also mentioned that there was a 15-acre buffer that was basically 100% wooded, referring to some of the riparian zones around the streams. When I looked at that document, it says 5 acres, 5.6. Okay, so I'm just trying to have a chance to combat some numbers here. The other thing I wanted to mention about what he said was that without counting the street trees, and when I looked further into their document, section 4.2b of their tree coverage area, that those trees may be in the street right-of-way. So I'm pretty confused. It's a complex document. I know you guys have already seen the paper that you have from 2015. A couple people referred to it already, the recommendations for implementing a tree protection ordinance in the town of Pittsboro. So just really, I'm going to stop it here and just say, in light of what people are saying, what I'm sharing with you, and what you've heard, I'm asking you to not vote on the proposal tonight, but refer back to the work that you've done, this wonderful thorough document, and at least do that much. I guess that's all. Thank you very much.
The next item on our agenda are the commissioner and manager updates. And have members of the board been to England City or Main Street Climate Change Human Resources meeting that they would like to share at this time?
I have not, well, I have an EDC event, and that was the Community Chatham Breakfast. It was Thursday or Friday. And we had the Secretary of Commerce in town, and he was quite enthusiastic about Chatham County and the opportunities for economic growth in Chatham County. And he was citing specifically the mega sites in Chatham Park itself. And he made an interesting commentary about the mega sites and how they haven't succeeded yet, but thinks they're getting their game together. Each time they fail, they learn and they up their game and get better. And he stated what I thought was a remarkable fact, that when these folks are making decisions, he said in one case they were looking at the procedure under which a business might be able to get up and running, and calculated that they would lose $86,000 a day for every day the project was late, and made mention of that as a way to say, be prepared. I thought it was very interesting.
Any other meeting report?
I'll report. I had the pleasure of attending a program at Pittsburgh Primary. It's a program funded by the Arts Council, Chatham County Arts Council, that children are working with an artist. Kids are learning how to interview, how to ask questions, how to create like a report. And my understanding is a documentary in the end. And they got to choose the topic, and the topic they chose this year was about economic development and small businesses in Chatham County. So they had several business leaders in the community that came at 3 different times for 3 different third grade classes. And these community leaders came to the school, and the children asked them questions. And we have some pictures here. You might recognize his face here. That is Grim Hoff. He was among the people that participated. There's somewhere. There's Greg here, who's sitting on the front row with the Roadhouse, Pam Smith on the right. You can see the child. I was not allowed to put any pictures of children. Pam Smith was there. And it was really wonderful. The kids were so engaged, and the people in the forum were so generous about answering all their questions, including things like, what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? And all kinds of really, I learned a lot of things about people I've known for a long time, so it was really fun. But it's a great program, and I can't wait to see the documentary that will come over interviewing these fine folks. And I want to thank the area business leaders who participated in this program. Thank you, Brian, for uploading these pictures. Okay. If there are no other reports from the commissioner.
No, I'm sorry, there is one more.
Okay.
This is not from a meeting of the Chatham County Climate Change Advisory Committee, but unbeknownst to me, that committee took it upon themselves, the leadership of that committee took it upon themselves and did a virtual vote electronically, and got approval from the committee to submit a memo on this very subject of tree protection to the county commissioners. And I thought that was surprising. And that memo should be in your packets, the supplemental materials, somewhere in the back here. I provide that memo. So I just wanted to mention that. It was a surprise to me, and it may be of interest to all of us.
Thank you. Brian Griesbeck, if you'd bring us the report of the town manager, that would be excellent.
Thank you, Mayor Perry. I have included in your packet tonight, in my updates, some timelines for a few projects that we have either going on or coming up on us immediately. I won't go over each and every line item within each project, but just kind of highlight a couple of things here. With regards to Pittsburgh Elementary School road, bridge, and culvert repair, design work for that is going on right now. There is pointed to one particular item that could help us or set us back a little bit, and that would be a hydrologic and hydraulic study that's currently being completed right now, that FEMA would review, and if it required changes to, I'll oversimplify this, hopefully not beyond what it really is, but there were changes to the flood map, for example, then that would essentially create an additional review period of approximately 3 months. And so the final date that you have for completion here in December could be moved up a little bit if we're not required to do that floodplain modification or reporting. So there is that. Water treatment and supply. The plant expansion feasibility study that we've been working on, and we had some discussion a meeting or two ago with CDM Smith, Mr. Pickett, town engineer, Ms. Goodson. That is ongoing. You'll note the last item does have a featured piece that examines the emerging contaminants and how we would deal with them, and we're looking to wrap that piece up in April. The overall project would be wrapped up in June and help us provide some direction on what we're going to do with water supply treatment. Herd Road water line repair is, I believe, just starting to move forward again with Hydro Structures, the town's firm, submitting some responses to the state with regards to some permitting questions. We hope to keep that on track and be done in August of this year. And then finally, something you guys are going to be a little bit more directly involved in would be the budget schedule. The budget requests are due from staff on March 1st. We ultimately look to have that completed. Note there at the bottom, we're required by law to have it completed at the end of June. We're going to try for the first meeting, we're going to set the goal of having it completed by the first meeting in June this year, which of course can be extended if we have more questions, if there's more work or anything like that on it. So we're going to set the bar a little bit higher this year on that. There is a date there for a budget work session on May 24th. That obviously hasn't been set. We'll circle back with you on that. And any other meetings that may be required with the budget, we will get with you on that in advance if that's necessary. The only other item that I point out here is something that we've been talking about and trying to coordinate via email. And it appears as if, with regards to a retreat itself, the board may be able to meet on March 28th. If you guys could check your calendars real quick and let me know if that's doable, we can make arrangements for that. That's identified here within the budget schedule, and obviously the information that we would generate and share and discuss would help feed that budget process, but it's not in and of itself a required part of the budget per se, but more of an organizational issue that budget benefits greatly. With that, I will, in the interest of time, I think, tap out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to bring those up.
I have one. The retreat for the 28th, is that they started in the morning?
Well, we talked about starting that in the morning, but if you guys want to try to come up with a different schedule on that, that's fine. We can, like I said, if that's not doable, let me know as soon as possible. We'll be getting you some information out if it is. Thank you.
One question. just so I can be sure I'm clear. This FEMA study, this thing they call CLOMAR, is about a 3-month duration.
If it's required.
If it's required. So this December 19, if it's has that included, so if it's not required, we're talking what, October?
Yeah, I can circle back with Elizabeth on that, but that was my impression from Elizabeth. We could skinny that up. I think that December is worst case.
Okay, got it. Great, thanks.
Is this something that we could communicate to Pittsburgh Elementary? I'm sure people that have children there would be really interested in seeing these time frames. Would that be something we could do?
Yes.
Great.
All right. As to our next agenda item, we're into old business. The first item is Parks and Recreation Master Plan update. And Paul Horn, our Parks Director, is
Thank you. This is just an update to follow up from our last work session where you proposed a way forward. We've taken all of your questions, comments, and concerns and addressed them in the document. We've revised the maps. We've incorporated new material from Chatham Park and from the county Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which is also being done concurrently. And we are sending the document to the printer. And we will have it for you before the March 25th meeting. Hopefully, I'll get it to you as soon as the printer gets it back to us. And then you can really dive into it for consideration. We, in your packet, I did leave the executive summary that goes through the high points of the plan, which you've seen before. This is slightly truncated, but the same basic idea. And so look forward to that.
very good. People have questions for Paul?
One, Paul, you made mention of the comments and concerns and how they've been addressed. Do you have a report detailing those items?
I emailed that out to you. They're primarily your concerns, and I emailed that out to the board as soon as I addressed them and invited further comment or questions and did not get any response from that.
When did you do that?
I can dig that up and find a date and resend the document.
Okay, please. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Sorry for not responding.
Not at all.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Seeing you in March. Next item is a presentation by Jeff Jones regarding the tree protection plan, additional elements.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. Tonight we're going to continue our discussion on Chatham Park additional element tree protection, and what I will try to do is walk you through the element as staff understands it, and then you all can engage with Chatham Park on some questions that I might pose towards the end of my presentation here, and then we can just have a dialogue back and forth on your understanding and my understanding, and Chatham Park can sort of chime in too. I want to first start out with staff's understanding of the three tiers of areas that tree coverage, tree protection that the element speaks to, which is that village center, that activity center, and then outside of activity centers. Currently, the element as written provides for 3% residential tree coverage area, 3% for residential projects in the village center. And that village center is that very dense downtown core feel in the activity center. The activity center is going to be at a 10 to 15% of tree coverage area. And that's for all uses within the activity center in section 7.1. And then we go outside of those commercial areas, we'll say, denser areas, and you start getting into a 20 to 25% for residential and 10 to 15% non-residential outside of the activity center. Those two inside the activity center and outside the activity center have a sliding scale that is based on the amount of existing trees that will be used to satisfy the TCA requirements. The more trees that are kept, the lower the percentage. If Chatham Park chooses to replant, then you have to go to the higher percentage. Part of Chatham Park's element that was provided to you all as a rewrite back in 2017, we had a workshop on tree protection. And at that workshop, our UDO example was pretty much what Chatham Park had put in their original tree coverage and tree protection element. And at that meeting, it was discussed that we didn't feel like that was going to get the tree coverage area that we wanted. And there was discussion as to other places that Chatham Park might go off and look at those. One of those has been mentioned tonight, but that's Durham. And I think Chatham Park has expressed this in other meetings that they have utilized Durham's ordinance for their rewrite of their element. And what I'd like to do is sort of walk you through, there we go, a comparison of Durham's tree protection ordinance as it's currently written. And Durham is going through some changes. They have UDO amendments before their boards this month and probably some moving forward. If we look back at this area, the sort of the boxes that I drew there, that village center, again, that's going to be that densest downtown core area. And in Durham, that's going to be in your downtown tier. And in Durham, the downtown tier, according to their UDO, does not require any tree protection. Chatham Park is providing for 3% residential in the village center area.
But not commercial, just residential.
Just residential, and Durham's not either one of them.
Right, I understand.
Yeah. Just comparison of the ordinances.
Right, just to clarify.
Right. Comparison to Durham as we move further out from the downtown core into that activity center. In Durham, this would be called that urban tier. And you can see the tables that we have here. The top table is what's in the element. And that's where you get to the TCA of existing trees, and then the sliding scale of what's required between 10% and 15%. And then you go to Durham's current ordinance in the urban tier, which would be that there would be a 3% tree coverage area. Durham is proposing to change, has some language proposed to change that, and that's on the screen here. And I want to say that Durham is proposing for residential uses to go anywhere between 7%, and then there's a sliding scale. If a development can't meet the 7% off the top, then there is a sliding scale if there's less than 7% down to, if there's less than 3%, then the tree coverage area requirement is 10%. All other development shall provide a minimum of 3% tree coverage in their proposed ordinance. And so you can see Chatham Park is, if they choose to go less than 6%, take all the trees down, they would replant at a 15% tree coverage area. Whereas Durham, if that's what we're comparing to, they would go back at a 3% for residential uses. And then everything else would be 3%. If you keep moving further out to sort of the outside of the suburban area, this would be the suburban tier in Durham. And again, the chart on the top is straight out of the element, and it breaks out residential uses. If existing trees are used, it's 20%, and then it's a sliding scale. If you go down to where a development might take trees down to less than 10%, then they would have to provide back up to 25% tree coverage area. And that would be for residential, and then there's a 10 to 15% sliding scale for non-residential. Durham's current ordinance looks very similar to what's in into the element, where you have a 20% sliding scale down up to 25% if you're less than 10. Pretty much the verbatim language there, and again for non-residential, 10 to 15%. The proposed ordinance doesn't quite change the percentage too much. It still is wanting to preserve at a minimum 20%, and if those 20% of trees for development, if that can't be met as a straight 20% as part of the development, and if anything less than 10%, then you go up to 25%, and that would again be comparable to what Chatham Park is proposing. I'm not saying anything about Durham's ordinance other than to give you, these are the comparisons. That's what the element was written on, and I thought it might be beneficial for you all to see Durham's ordinances on the screen in front of you. So, any questions about that interpretation from either that I can answer or Chatham Park can answer?
When we go get in front of, I can't really see all the numbers from where I am, so it'd be nice to.
Yeah, that was fast. Well done.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean.
Or email it when you go there.
Sure.
Kid, that was a valiant effort to help us understand the current and proposed changes to what Durham's got going and what Chatham Park has proposed. I'm curious about the comparison of the very first scenario, which was the downtown area, because that's a historic city that's existing structures and infill within those areas. But comparing that to a greenfield development just doesn't work. So I still want to dig into this further and get a better understanding of how specifically those portions of Durham's current and proposed changes to policy, how they address greenfield, which would be the comparison.
Right, and I think their greenfield development would be those suburban,
only suburban
tiers, and then that urban tier, and then the suburban tier. There's, if you read through their ordinance, there are exceptions to infill development.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly exceptions to replanting of trees, and that's part of the element. And again, I'm not advocating for Durham. I was just trying to give you an example or a clear understanding of at least the charts and the percentage of tree coverage area as it relates to Durham and the element that's proposed.
It does feel odd that we have just looked at, we are following Durham instead of thinking
Well,
about what vision we want to have and creating something ourselves instead of just basing on something that's already been done.
Well, I think what you all should engage with Chatham Park on that, because they're responding to what was asked of them.
Right.
If you want them to study other places and come back with something else, you need to engage with Chatham Park on that. And likewise, staff would do any research that you all need to further help you consider this element.
And really, the Durham model is one that incentivizes preservation,
right? Because
it penalizes you for not preserving trees and reduces the amount of land you can devote towards your business or housing. So that's one of the key features in the Durham model. And I want everybody to know, I've read the emails. We are not contemplating clear-cutting 90% of Chatham Park. That is not what is on the table. This is a very complex set of regulations, and the tree preservation component is but one of those regulations. We've been at this for years, and if I can find my notes, I'm going to tell you that in addition to the tree preservation model is complete streets, which require street trees on virtually every road. Those trees that get planted, and some of them will be in bioretention cells, that is brand new to Pittsboro, brand new to any community, in the right-of-way, those trees do not count towards what we're calling tree coverage. It will produce tree canopy, it will produce the benefits of the trees, but it will not be credited towards any 10%, 15%, 20%, 25% of tree coverage. We have a pretty thorough landscape element in Chatham Park, and that is going to require lots of planting and lots of preservation if you can do it. Any perimeter buffer on a piece of property that is less than 25 feet in width, and there's a lot of that, 20-foot, 15-foot separations, ends up with a 30-foot between two properties, does not count towards the obligation they have in producing tree coverage. It will produce a canopy, it will produce the benefits of trees being planted and growing, but they will not have, in this element, credit for those items. We have requirements in that landscape element for planting in parking lots. Every 9 or so parking spaces has to be within the distance of a tree, planted in the parking lot, with special soil requirements, special depth of preparation of the site. Those trees will produce canopy. Those trees will not be credited towards tree coverage. So there's a lot of trees that will be preserved and or planted that will not be credited as coverage. That is a fact. We've got additional stream buffers in Chatham Park. And I can tell you, we've got 100-foot stream buffers on perennials. That is twice the size of any stream buffer required in Pittsboro today. We've got 100-foot buffers on intermittent streams that are draining to the Haw. We've got 200-foot buffers on perennial streams draining to the Haw if there are endangered species in the Haw. That is 2 times and 4 times the requirements for the town as a whole. We've got a 300-foot buffer on the Haw, and we've got a 500-foot buffer on the Haw. And that is 6 times and 10 times the current town requirements on the Haw. We've required them to do stormwater nutrient reduction. We've required them to attenuate the peak flow for the 1-year storm, the 2-year storm, the 5-year storm, and the 10-year storm. Today, Pittsboro requires attenuation of the 1-year storm. Chatham Park, has agreed and continues to design to treat for nutrients in accordance with the Jordan rules. The state has suspended the Jordan rules. This project, this master plan, continues to meet those standards of the Jordan rules. We have been at this a very long time, and we have been making demands on Chatham Park that are not made on any other developer in town. We really need to look at our existing UDO because the tree coverage standards in there are minuscule compared to what we are requiring of Chatham Park or what is under the state. So I want everyone to know that this concept of 10% preservation and 90% of the trees going away is an impossibility. We've got an open space and a parks and rec requirement of them that will set aside at least 28% of the land. It's a multifaceted approach, and it's a very substantial demand and requirement on Chatham Park. We have not been ignoring, there's not anyone up here that envisions a 10% tree coverage for Pittsboro. We do have to balance the things between the environmental issues and our socioeconomic issues. We need housing. We need affordable housing. We need inclusive housing. We need jobs. We need jobs for our children to go away to school and want to come back to. We have to find a balance, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do up here. We are not interested in clear-cutting Pittsboro, but we are interested in having nodes of very urban development, of high density, and other areas that are a little bit more suburban. It is in compliance or in association with Chatham County, whose objective stated in their master plan is to preserve the rural nature and beauty of the county, is to focus growth and development in the cities, in the towns, Pittsboro, Siler City, Colston. We are trying very hard to reach that balance. I'll leave it at that.
Further questions for Jeff Jones with respect to this chart and the comparison with the Durham ordinance?
So I'll just point out a couple more things as it relates to the charts, and then I'll go to my last slide, which is just some items of thought that you should think about as you engage with Chatham Park on this. One, the current regulations of the town. We don't currently have tree protection ordinances in town outside of riparian buffers and state regulated buffers. Anything we do, Chatham Park does, or if we do in a UDO or a standalone ordinance, is going to be better than what we're currently doing. I think we all can agree that what we're doing now is not in keeping with all these folks' testimony tonight and what you see as the town of Pittsboro, including in the future. So right now we're doing nothing. Somebody could go out there and clear cut all the property up into the regulated buffers. That's ordinances today. But in spite of those ordinances, we have had responsible development that has kept the trees. And I don't see that changing. What we're trying to do now is regulate, put down on paper, legal terms, legal regulations that would hold this developer and other developers to the minimum that we would want to see. If it's not this, engage with Chatham Park on what it is. I don't know that. I don't know what that is. So I just want to make sure that everybody understood where we are today, which is not good. And the longer we prolong the UDO or this, the longer we could be without regulations. Regulations come in the form of what can we legally do. The state gives us powers to zone and do things that we would like to do, but only to a certain extent. I think as you go through this process, you should engage with the town attorney on what he feels like you can legally do for tree protection. I think it's been documented that tree protection ordinances are not set in stone. That's something we can do, but they work well when there's an incentive-based process. You have a developer here who is trying to meet the tree protection element and the requirements of this town when we don't really have a legal standing to go much beyond what he's given to us. You need to engage with the town attorney on that. We'd love to be able to do all the things that were expressed tonight if that was your will. I'm not sure that's the will of the state to this town. Remember, we are a subsidiary of the state, and they give us the power to make laws. With that said, we can engage with Chatham Park, or we can talk some more about it, but I do have some things, just food for thought, as we get through the tree protection element. And I think what you should do at some point in time, if it hasn't been done, is engage with Chatham Park to explain their methodology of how the TCPA will be established and how that TCPA will go to tree coverage area for a particular development. I think it's important for you all in the public to know how that works. Certainly I've understood or had conversations with Chatham Park about how they feel like it should work, but I think it's up to them to explain it to you and not staff. I'm not here defending their ordinance. Non-residential and mixed uses within the village center being exempt should be discussed and might need to be thought about, that we do need to regulate that. They're going to use this TCPA method where you can have tree protection coverage area outside of where the development is. So they could make that TCPA somewhere else or adjacent to where the development's going to think about non-residential and mixed use within the village center. There is language that I think needs to be cleaned up, or an interpretation or an engagement with Chatham Park, that it reads to, as you've heard from speakers tonight, the TCA may be located in street rights of way, and street trees may count towards TCA. I think if we don't want those things to happen, you need to, I think it reads that it may allow for that. It seems like example 4 may not be quite right, or is missing some language there, because I think it should be 15%, not 10%. And then I think if you look towards section 4F, that may lead to some significant mass grading. That's where we talk about lots under 10,000 square feet being able to be essentially graded in mass to make development work. Of course, they would not grade into these tree protected areas, but the thought of mass grading is in the element, because the element as written allows for mass grading under 10,000 square feet. All the residential lots that have been preliminarily approved to date, some 500, 600 lots, are well under 10,000 square feet. So all those will be mass graded as according to this element. So if mass grading is something you want to not do, we need to figure that out, however that is. Make sure trees sizes match the landscape element. There's a difference in the landscape element and the tree protection element that says that a tree in the landscape element has to be 1.5 inches. It only has to be 1 inch in the tree protection element if we're replanting. Those need to be consistent. And staff is asking for that consistency. And you can see at the last bullet there, it's 2 inches versus 2.5 on canopy. That second number there is what's in the landscape element. First number is what's in the tree protection element. And then a 1 inch versus a 1/4 inch for understory trees. So these are some things and some ideas that if you want to move forward with the element as written and you want to kind of smooth this out a little bit, these are some of the bullet points that staff would have you engage with Chatham Park on these. And I can entertain any questions that you may have. But
A question about, you said that the TSA, they could count the trees, the way it's written down, you could count the street trees. But it also appears to me that they could also count the buffers and vegetative setbacks and also development common areas. Those are all to be counted as TCA.
Yeah, I think that's been in the landscape element, that's been in the open space element. Those are sort of ideals that have already sort of been.
So the suggestion is that the street trees would be separate from the trees that the TCA is not really accurate.
I think I think there's some language that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah,
on
because if
that.
that's the case, that's a big difference.
Yeah, I think the language says street trees may count towards TCA. And
Do you believe that trees that are protected by the buffer should also be able to count, because that's also?
I think those are decisions that have already been made in the other elements.
But this is a separate element.
Engage with Chatham Park on that.
I'm just saying, if we're claiming that, it's much more than 10% because the street trees aren't counted in that 10% and the buffers, but according to this, it is.
Well, again,
What I said was the perimeter buffers that are less than 25 feet in width don't count. And I don't know what a vegetative setback is.
I don't know what that is. So that's again, we have to figure that out.
Yeah.
I just have a question too about, I don't know, when you read about the things that don't count for TCA, I don't have much been written down so easily, but, sorry. So from what I'm reading, no tree coverage would be required for non-residential, which would be all businesses, I assume. Mixed-use developments, which would be shopping centers, your town centers, which there's a lot of ambiguity about that, in my opinion. It wouldn't be required for houses sitting on 1 acre lots or smaller. It wouldn't be counted farms or land that's under forest management, but it would be on lots over 1 acre. I mean, so there's really, by the time you add up all these things, there's not much left that would count for TCA. That really concerns me.
No problem.
It's in section 3 of ACLA.
Yeah, applicability.
Section 3.
So it says, TCA shall not be required in the following areas in Chatham Park: non-residential and mixed-use individual development sites in a village center. 2, lots that are 1 acre or less in size. 3, agricultural land. 4, land under forestry management purpose prepared by a registered forester in accordance with the section. So that's a pretty, I mean, that leaves not a whole lot. That leaves houses that are over 1 acre.
I think there's some words that need to be put into that may be, that you can ask Chatham Park about that.
There's a lot of
advertised for single development, I think is what that's going into, not as part of the subdivision.
Pat, would you feel better if we struck 1 and 2?
Yes, that would help.
That's what I want to do.
Okay.
Well, 3 and 4 are by state statute, are they not?
They are.
Right. Not really anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Taking out 1 and 2 because definitely, I mean, mixed-use development could include residential, could include apartments and houses.
Mentioned this while we're here. For item 2, it's talking about lots that are, well, I scratched it out so it's hard to read, 1 acre or less in size. We do have in this document requirements for tree coverage on non-residential development on a 2 acre parcel, and it meets stated, I would still like for lots of 1 acre and less to have an on-site requirement. Unless, of course, it's in the shopping center or one of these other areas where TCPA would be able to be used, because you want more density. So you do a cluster development where you set aside something over here in order to do more dense here. I would like to do the 1 acre site and let there be some adjustment in the geometric requirements. Like right now it's a minimum of 25 feet wide. I could see going on a 1 acre something less than 25 feet wide.
Well, it struck me that that number 2 that requires the 1 acre or less in size was sort of a step in the right direction, but knowing the kind of density we've got in this subdivision, I'm wondering, like you, if that doesn't exempt too much property, and would it be better to adjust that to say ½ acre?
Residential development. I argue very strongly that there's no tree preservation situated on any residential lot.
They still could be counted toward.
It will contribute mightily to the canopy, but I again am arguing for us not to find ourselves having to do enforcement on individual lots for people who take down trees to create yards. Let's have the subdivision set aside the amount of property required for that percentage, and anything on the lots is extra and gravy.
It needs to be written very clearly about the requirements. To me, it's very unclear in the way this is written that is a requirement. It doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, I agree with it. Yes.
I agree that it's difficult to enforce 1 acre lots. People are going to cut down the trees, and there's no way to enforce it. I mean, there's no language in here that would say what the consequences would be if someone did cut down trees.
It would be a zoning violation. I would have to issue a zoning violation.
Somebody has to go around and check on it.
Sure. Right. Well, I'm sure neighbors would help each other.
And I think that's probably what we'd get is neighbor against neighbor.
Yeah.
Jeff, are you finding any enforcement for any of these?
Am I finding the issue, like, as
Any
written?
means of enforcement
Any means of enforcement?
for any of these tiers? We're talking about residential,
Well,
like high-density residential right now.
Right now, once development occurs and they get close to finishing CO time, that's when staff's going to go out and make sure that landscaping's in, all the things that go along with zoning, parking, landscaping. If there was a tree coverage area on the site, then we would make sure that was there.
So it's a point in time.
It is. And then it's afterwards, it's following up if, disease trees come about and that we get complaints. Those are things that just naturally will occur over time that we'll just have to keep a monitor on.
And what means would you have for, let's say, a dramatic removal of trees that were in either TCA or TCPA, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around this too.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything in this particular element that says if trees are removed, then they have to be planted back at a certain rate. If a business owner does it or a homeowners association, that would just fall back to general enforcement of the current zoning ordinance and whatever civil penalties could be levied on that. Could be $50 a day or so until it's remedied.
Another concern I have is if parcels of Chatham Park are turned over to forestry management, this could be used as a tool for clearing land, and then it could be turned around and developed, and there would have
there wouldn't be a lot of tree protection anymore because all the trees have been taken down through forestry management. I know that some communities have taken steps that land that is forested can't be developed for like up to 5 years.
I think if there is statutes that would allow us to adopt an ordinance that says no development can occur for a 3-year period of time once an unapproved forestry activity occurred. But if they went through and they got a forestry plan approved and they protected the buffers, but they clear cut it, it would be fine.
And there's nothing to stop a developer from doing that as a way to make it easier for them down the road to build houses in.
I think forestry management is part of a property owner's ability to manage his property, and the state gives him that right.
But legally, is there anything the town can do to keep that from happening? Because, you know, we all would rather have, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, I personally would like to see significant trees protected. That kind of development would be taking the best trees, and then we'd end up, we'd lose a lot of important canopies. Is there anything that can be done to keep that from happening, for it to be used as a tool to make it cheaper?
I don't know one. I just mentioned the 3-year without forestry management.
Yeah. More
well, it's a state law. We could adopt an ordinance next week if we wanted to on that. The county currently has that.
I'd like for something like that to be added, whatever the maximum amount that we can do, but that's not just used as a tool.
Well, that's not going to prevent somebody to go through a legal forestry management program and thin out their trees.
I understand that.
And we don't want to
It
discourage
might be a
that.
discouragement.
Okay.
You know,
I just wanted to make sure that
I just don't
we
want it to be
understood.
a tool used by developers to avoid having to follow the tree ordinance, the more rigid tree ordinance. And I know that there's limits to what we can do, but I'd like to include what we can in this ordinance.
I agree.
To be a discouragement from using that just to clear the land in preparation for development.
I strongly agree, Commissioner Foley, and thank you for your passion about the subject. I would very much like us to look carefully at that 3-year delay. As I understand it, Morrisville has successfully implemented it, and it's a 3-year delay in cases of clear cutting of wooded forest properties that are under forest management and state plan for a different taxation based on forestry. And if they have been developed or identified for development. So you understand it better than I do.
I can get into it, yeah.
Are there incentives to keep the developer from doing that just to save money on, you know?
I think you all, as a town, could offer whatever incentives you think is appropriate.
To protect some of the significant trees, maybe we can come up with some kind of incentive to protect significant areas of trees or significant trees. Do other people feel this way too? People concerned?
There's legitimate forestry services that are people owners of the property they run. I would not want to infringe on that right now.
We can certainly offer incentives.
There is a sentence in this document talks about the status of a piece of property if in fact it doesn't have trees on it, and that it would only need to meet the tree preservation standards. And I'm suggesting if trees aren't there, then for whatever reason, you have to go to the higher standard. That's something to do. That's part of incentivizing and penalizing, if you will. But that's the only thing I saw in here that I would ask to be changed. And I would not, I mean, I'd be interested to hear, Jeff, what your research tells you about what can be done on a legitimate forestry activity. But I find it hard to believe you should be penalized for illegal activity.
I'm not suggesting a penalty, I'm suggesting an incentive to protect some parts of it, or trees or stands of trees.
It might be, I think, be helpful in regards to what it is that we can or cannot do, or is that a test which is going to apply to, as we propose things that we may not have been tested at the state level, like the forest bill ordinance.
No, ma'am. I mean, like, as Jeff said, there's a state law that says that there can be a 3-year delay. So I mean, you certainly can implement that throughout the town's jurisdiction. There's no question about that. But that's not an incentive. That's just it delays development.
But if we wanted to extend it to 5 years, is that a possibility? Is that...
Well, you're taking somebody's property interest, and I don't think you can do that without just compensation.
But if it can be 3 years, then how do we know how long?
Because the statute says 3 years. It doesn't say 5 years.
Paul, can you repeat that? I missed what you stated.
If you take somebody's property right...
No, not that. About, did you say that the law provides that somebody conducting a legal forestry service can then be denied development of their property for a certain period of time because of that legal forestry?
They would own the property. More than likely, they don't own the property, they just have forestry rights to it. County property.
You don't cut somebody else's trees. You own the property and you have it cut if you want to do it. And clear cutting is the most efficient way to cut timber in Piedmont, North Carolina. So if somebody's
some
going
people
to...
who don't necessarily sell the land, they just buy the rights to the
Right, if you're a logger, you would do that.
Right.
But if you're the owner, you could sell your timber.
But there may be cases where Chatham Park would retain ownership and hire loggers.
They probably, presumably they would.
Exactly, so that's the law. So in that case, Chatham Park would still own the land.
Yes, ma'am.
So that we could say they could not develop it for 3 years after
Yes,
they
ma'am.
log it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, in reference to the incentives, I don't have a problem with doing that, but I need to know what specifically you're talking about. If there are a section of trees and everything which have, big trees on it, won't say big trees, oak trees, great trees on it, then maybe we can incentivize not just Chatham Park, because this is going to be an ordinance for the whole town, not just one development. In this particular case, we're talking about this one, that the UDO will start to apply to all developers. So I don't have a problem with doing that, as long as we can look into what type of incentives we can do and offer.
Get creative and see what we can come up with.
And as long as, our current state is good to go, good. I don't have a problem with doing that.
Further questions?
I got just one more. Jeff, maybe you can, the TCPA, it says right here, is established. Who establishes that?
Well, I think those are questions that we probably need to flesh out too. Chatham Park presumably is going to establish that. I would presumably say that the town has the ability to say no when a development plan comes along or a subdivision comes along and says, no, that's not correct TCPA. Ideally, a small area plan of the North Village might establish TCPAs for certain sections. I think that's what, again, if we were to talk to Chatham Park, I think they're thinking that each section, like section 5.1, 5.2, is going to be the tree coverage protection area or planning area.
Now, it says that the TCPA can be used for the following items: village centers, shopping centers, residential subdivisions, developments other than condominiums and apartments, and a portion of 7.1. So the village center is an area that will be defined at some point, and at that point, the TCPA will be identified.
That's a good goal to have.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's the intent.
Yes.
So if we need to strengthen that
Right.
language to say that.
Right.
I think every time a shopping center is submitted, that's when the TCPA for that shopping center would be
Right.
drawn.
Right.
I think the same for residential subdivision.
Yeah, as we haven't had this element approved yet, so what we've been reviewing and ultimately you all have been voting on for the residential portion of Town Hall 5.1 was a scenario where TCPA was throughout the entire area and not adjacent to that development, but it was part of 5.1. And if that's the scenario that Chatham Park wishes to employ throughout all of Chatham Parks, we might want to have a little bit better understanding of what defines a TCPA. Acreage-wise, location, adjacency to development, or as folks have pointed out, could it be 5 miles away? I don't know if the language in this ordinance says that it has to be close by. Or if that's the goal, to mitigate the development, I think that's what tree protection would be, is to mitigate development.
But the town would not have a voice in the selection of the TCPA.
Well, I'm saying that you do,
Okay.
through this element and through other development that comes before you. Say no, it needs to be adjacent or in the area, or some sort of defining metric that says where it's.
But then it would be incumbent upon this board to continue to bring that up again with each.
Well, I hope you define it in the element.
Thank you.
And the element says it has to be within a quarter of a mile from development or something. I don't know what that is, but.
Or if there are areas that were identified that we really particularly wanted to protect, that maybe there'd be a way that TCPA could be applied.
I think they would be. I think they would listen to that. But if they have plans for development that may not include every area of the town wishes to say trees. I mean, that's where you need to engage with Chatham Park on that.
Mr. Jones, I do have a question. It's about the recommendation for implementing tree protection ordinance from the Conservation Ordinance Review Committee. Okay. In the section 3A, and where it's talking about 15% canopy coverage for downtown district, and then 30% multifamily, which includes commercial. Could you explain that a little, go into a little?
Well, I think that was based off of a study that the Conservation Committee did, or had someone perform back in 2014-15, and that was based off of current tree canopy in the downtown area and elsewhere to establish that percentage. That's how I understand it too, and how it came about.
They based it, I think, on Chapel Hill requirements.
They may have based some things on Chapel Hill. If Chapel Hill is an example of what we would like to study, I can bring that to you all and show that it's not a thou shalt do. There's an incentive based in Chapel Hill that says you keep trees, but we understand development, and you can remove trees through a process to replant back.
No, I wasn't saying Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
I was just saying specifically I wanted that to be explained a little bit further.
Yeah, I didn't write that, so
okay.
It could be based on Chapel.
What Jeff mentioned is that, Chapel Hill will allow you to take the trees and replant. Right. They also have a caveat that their downtown doesn't have to have any requirement, nor does the university.
I just wanted to look.
I think what this shows is in these highly urbanized areas that you get foliage in different ways. You can look at downtown Pittsburgh. We've got 8 or 9 holly trees. What I think from the courthouse north to the Hanks. very little foliage on that street. That is an urban environment. Well, no, it's a model that was done years and years ago and is being done again today throughout the country.
They like to say trees with more canopy.
Well, I think some of your retailers would agree with you because they want the canopy up so you can see the stores. Right.
There are a lot of cities who have incorporated beautiful trees in their urban areas, and those cities are very desirable. And people want that. People in this community want that.
This has been a really constructive conversation. Jeff, I really appreciate your leading us, guiding us through it. I am still accumulating my questions for Chatham Park. And I have a lot of them, so I am confused. I have been spending time on the element, and it's still not clear to me. And so I think we probably need a workshop.
I agree.
For all of us to dig through this and understand it really thoroughly. It's a very important subject. It's obviously very important to this community. I counted 130 emails, and that was quite a public expression, and it was a very diverse array of people too. You know, I recall Beverly Bland and Al Cook and folks who I really didn't expect to hear speaking out regarding an environmental issue. So I think it's really clear to this community that this is of concern and we really need to get it right. I also heard from a woman on Thompson Street. Oh, yes. Margaret Farrell. Mr. Messick, you'll remember this. I'm sorry? Someone recognize that name? Margaret Farrell?
Sure. I do. Sure.
I haven't met her. So, she can?
Yeah.
And she recounted that she had experienced flooding on her land from land clearing for residential development. We also heard from someone just up the street from the Verdicchios, who recently experienced a 12-foot rise on their land and flooding into their basement because of development upstream. And that was Mary Stokes on Salisbury Street. So, you know, I'm just blown away, frankly, and I do think that we need to do a very careful job with this and understand it very thoroughly. And it's still evading me the exceptions and I'm sorry, the loopholes are concerning. So,
John, I'll just mention, I think the property you're talking about that has the flooding is the property that's in the 100-year floodplain. It's a known condition. Yeah, so I don't think it's from development.
Although I can say I grew up in this town and I don't recall it ever flooding like that. And it's happened more than once in recent times. So something is going on, whether it's global warming or floodplain.
Well, the floodplain was established, so FEMA knew about it.
And it's happened with greater frequency than 100 years.
So I'll propose that for our next, I think it was third Monday meeting that we originally slated for the UDO, that we use that time to focus on this additional element. I have no interest in delaying this project, but I am committed to getting it right, and I don't think we're ready for that.
I agree.
Well, I think we first received this in May of 2017. So I think we've had it before us for quite some time. We've put a lot of work into it. And I certainly want to take this opportunity this evening to work with Chatham Parks and share my thoughts on this document as we have the time scheduled and are intended to do so. If no one else feels they are prepared or want to do that, I'll understand, but I certainly want to take this opportunity to make my comments known.
So who will be speaking for Chatham Park? Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you, Mayor.
Zach, welcome. Thank you. I'll start on page 1. And it is
June, January 22nd.
Yeah. You have the red line, January 22nd.
Are you looking at the red line version?
I am. Ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Section 2, item 4. It states that TCPA may be used to satisfy the TCA requirements of this element for any of the following: village centers, shopping centers, residential subdivisions, and developments other than condominiums and apartments. I would like to suggest that you strike residential or add residential before the word developments. So it would read village centers, shopping centers, subdivisions, and developments other than condominiums and apartments, or the same, shopping centers, residential subdivisions, and residential developments other than condominiums and apartments. I guess to be clear about exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, got it.
Page 2, as I've said already, I'd like to strike 3.1 and 3.2 and allow for some lesser standard for the 1 acre parcel. So the 1 acre parcel has an obligation, but it can be less than a 2 acre parcel.
So first of all, number 1, you're saying strike the entire sentence.
Yeah. Page.
What about number 2?
Yeah, I wanted to strike that also, but allow for lesser standards for 1 acre. So still have the requirement on a 1 acre parcel, but it can be less than that required of a 2 acre parcel from the geometric standards. In other words, we require a minimum area of 1,000 feet with no dimension less than 25 feet in order for that to count as tree coverage. And I'm saying it can be less than that for a 1 acre parcel.
And by the way, this is talking about non-residential lots. I'm not sure we're going to have a residential lot.
I don't think we want that.
But anyway, there's other language in here that says residential lots. Coverage on residential lots is not counted, even though there will be trees there.
Right.
So that's why this is referring to non-residential lots, which I think you know that, but there was some confusion previously.
Well, residential lots would be part of a larger development, which should still occur.
Say that again?
The small individual lot would be part of a larger development.
Small individual residential lot. You're talking about residential lots?
I'm just saying individual lots would be part of a larger development.
If it was residential, TCPA would come in. If it was a shopping center, TCPA would come in. If it was a 1 acre parcel of commercial development, adding this sentence that ensures that there is that requirement. So this is removing that from the requirement. You don't have to answer this now. You can if you like.
I haven't answered anything yet.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. Page 3, two things. I don't know what a TCPA use is, and nor do I know what a vegetative setback is.
Is that in section 4?
Yes. Yep. 4.2 and 4.3a.
I actually have a note here. I read that section 4, number 2, numerous times, and I was more confused after reading it than when I started. And, I don't know what we need to do with that to get it into a little better terms.
Well, I'm asking what it is. Page 4. One of them, strike B and C at the top of the page. On page 4, item H.
There's your definition. There's somebody said that right there. Residential lot.
Page 4, item H. I would like to add to the end of the sentence after the parentheses containing landscape element for the period and the dimensional standards of TCA. That means TCA will always meet the dimensional standards of TCA.
Wait, can you repeat that?
It says that TCA may consist of forested land in the floodway, fringe, reserved wetlands, preparing buffers, and any portion of the tract left undisturbed in order to create required runway buffers, satisfying the requirements established in the master landscaping plan. So there are requirements in the master landscaping plan it must adhere to. And I want to make sure that it also must adhere to the TCA requirements.
I got you.
Okay.
So my question about that is, will can it be located in land that's designated as a greenway or parkland? Is that a double dipping situation there too?
I would think tree coverage could be on rec land, but it's permanently set aside.
It's not double dipping. I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, you get taking TCPA credit and apply it at a space that would already be preserved. So it's not really any additional green space. That's what I mean by double dipping. You're counting the same piece of land for two different requirements.
Well, I think so much of zoning and land use does exactly that. So that you're more efficient.
Well, if we're trying to protect trees, it's reducing the number of trees that get saved.
So with those two, you're saying the town should be exempt. If the town owns land in Chatham Park that is exempt from any requirement of saving trees.
I'm just saying, if like, for example, we have set aside the several hundred acre land for park, if you're allowed to count parkland as part of the TCA, then that would take up a big chunk of the TCPA credit. You know, if you were allowed to use those parks as your TCPA credit. And the greenways are going to take up a lot of space. So that's my question. Will you...
Well, I'll say that when we've been contemplating TCPA, we have not been assuming anything on the town park site because we don't own that. And we can't control what you do on that site. We can't assume a certain percentage of development on that site. You could go 100% development or you could go 10% development. There's no way that we could calculate that in a TCPA analysis. So we haven't been assuming that would be part of the taking care of that requirement.
We include language that designated greenway and parkland will not count as TCPA. Will not satisfy the requirements to qualify. Is that reasonable?
We won't, I think, I understand that you're saying do not take your land and let that apply to.
I mean, my concern is by the time, if you can count stream buffers and you can count greenways, the bikeways, you can count the parks, then there's really not going to be much extra requirement for TCPA, is my concern. Does that make sense?
Greenways. So we want to exclude those from TCA.
Yes.
Greenways and parks.
Okay.
Parks owned by the town or parks in general?
Yes.
But I do think one thing that we talked about is that what we don't want to lose credit for is if you've got the greenway in the outer 50 feet of a riparian buffer, and you're saying that's a 30-foot wide area that would not get credit. There's no question about what that is. But there could be 10 feet on this side of it and 20 feet on this side of it that collected together would meet the 25-foot dimension. And the only reason it's separated is because the greenway's there. Now, the trees are still going to be on the greenway. You're not. But we're being penalized if you take that and say we can't use that 10 feet to add it to the other one. And I think we've written it that way to allow that. But
I'd rather err on the side of having a few extra trees.
oh, I'm not saying don't. I'm not saying don't do what you're saying. I'm just saying we have written it so that we get credit for that portion that's the greenway separates.
But if it's not part of the greenway, then that wouldn't be an issue. We're only talking about the part that is designated greenway. So if you're talking about a piece of land that's not part of the greenway that you're adding to it.
Well, what he's saying is, in the document, and I'm going to reinforce this when we get to it, is the minimum dimension in any direction of an area in order to count the TCA cannot be less than 25 feet. And he's saying that the greenway would bifurcate an area that he would want to get credit for that was 10 feet over here and 15 feet over here. So you'd get your 25, but it wouldn't technically meet the definition. So if we wanted to consider that, we'd have to write, I think, something special in that situation for greenways.
And so what you'll force me to do, which I can do, but it's not as sensitive to the land, is I can keep the 25 feet on the outside edge of the greenway, start the greenway, even though it may want to move 10 feet over for some significant reason. But I got to follow the rules to the letter, and I don't get that flexibility.
There's some way to write that in.
Do you understand that?
Good.
Looking.
There could be some special language for greenways.
Because otherwise, we have how many acres of greenways? We're going to have a really nice number of greenways.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be wonderful. But we would not get any extra TCPA because so much of it would be taken up by the greenways, which are not going to be, they're going to have some trees, but it's also going to have a road going through it, so it's not going to be tree protection.
A greenway trail. It's not a road.
Well, okay. You
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Okay, page 6, table 2. I'm not sure what a mixed use is.
Just defined
As
in here.
Yeah.
As residential.
Non-residential and residential.
Right. And so the reason we did that, we didn't know how to break it. Say if you have a building with street level retail and 3 stories or 100 stories of residential above it, what is the what is? And so by calling it mixed use, it kept it fairly simple.
I get it for a mixed use, vertically integrated mixed use building. Struggle with the idea that this parcel is commercial, this parcel's residential. Residential's got a 20% requirement, commercial's got a 10% requirement, 10 to 15, 20 to 25, whatever it is. And then that residential parcel gets to be at the lower threshold because it's encapsulated in something called mixed use.
So we're talking about those situations outside the village center and outside of a shopping center.
Yeah.
So we're probably down to a 1% kind of situation because I don't think that's going to occur outside of those areas. But it obviously can, but still, in terms of spending our energy on things, it's not going to be very likely.
But I support Commissioner Kyoko's suggestion. I think what you're getting at maybe is that rather than just saying mixed use, it should say something about vertical. And
so change mixed use to vertical.
at every opportunity, I'd like to encourage you to go up rather than down. So I don't know if it should be a word change of vertical uses or not, but I think we put a place, we put a marker on that.
Okay.
You can figure it out. Thank you.
We're on page 7 now. Notes to table 2. In item 2, I would like to strike in 2 places the words "and proposed." I think this goes back to our forestry conversation, so my original comment was to delete item 4, and maybe that needs to be reconsidered based on this forestry conversation.
So you're holding that thought for now?
Yeah.
Yeah, your reason for wanting to strike the "and proposed" is that only those utilities and only those public greenways that had already been dedicated.
Correct.
Okay.
That language is in there because it's commonly in municipal requirements like this, specifically Charlotte and Winston-Salem. So just as an example, I could probably give you more, but I know those off the top of my head.
Item C.
Like that, we were talking about the greenway, you said you didn't want to include that as a CPA, and that does indicate there,
Right.
that it's excluded. Maybe we could add parts to that area.
No, it's just.
Okay, let me just mention that after item 4, there are 2 more items, and they've got letters instead of numerals.
I think that's because the notes stop with number 4, and then it goes back to following what was happening before the notes. So there should be an A and B prior to the.
Okay, and they've been stricken. So these would then become A and B?
Yeah, the tables are A and B.
Yeah.
I don't know who said that, but thank you.
So what are,
I had to look at it.
That was Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Got it. It's almost as elegant as our UDO.
Point made.
Got it. So for item C, I would like to remove the words "residential uses in" and proceed village centers. And I would like to replace the words "or residential uses" with the word "within." So it would read village centers, period. A total of 3% TCA is required within village centers. So no longer segregated between residential and non-residential. All of it.
I think 3% is too low. But I think we need to look at the whole chart and just to see if these numbers are exceptional or not compared to other towns.
This is just a, no, I won't ask it. Page 10.
I like that question. Just wonder why acreage in a village center that is located within an activity center shall be excluded in calculating the percentage of PCA required for the game program. I don't know why that would be in there.
So they get acreage, the village center acreage. I'm sorry.
Yeah, acreage in a village center that is located within an activity center shall be excluded in calculating the percentage of PCA required for the remainder of the activity center. I would like to strike that.
Well, we've already covered that previously when it says the village center. Mr. Viego just asked to put 3% over that, but.
Okay, so that needs to be adjusted.
Right, it needs cleaning up.
Is it possible that a village center would be outside of an activity?
Well, I'll say this: so far we've got the North Village Small Area Plan where we have looked at this, and it is all within the village. It is all within the activity center, and I can't imagine the situation. But at the same time, you got, just as Jeff had said earlier, you guys approve any designation of a boundary of a village center and any designation of a boundary of an activity center when you approve review and approve the small area plan. So if it is, it's because you allowed it.
We need to have language in there about that.
About the fact that they are designated during the small area plan process. Is that what you're?
Well, I think it may be decided upon by the board, but it would be proposed by you. So I'm just curious. I mean, honestly, I thought it would always be nestled within an activity center.
In my mind too, but you know how many times we have contemplated all these unusual situations that we never imagined happening. I think it would be within the activity center. I haven't come up with one in my mind, but.
Page 10, item 5.2, cluster of trees. I don't think there's a definition of a cluster of trees. Is there? So I'm curious as to what constitutes a cluster of trees.
We have an individual tree, and the cluster is therefore one more than an individual tree.
One more. Agreed. There's some clerical work on page 11, item D at the top of the page. It has an extra B in it, the word B.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Page 12.
Didn't you say that this needs to be 2.5?
I think that was, yeah, that's what it is, for consideration.
Well, let me just say this. When we're not trying to, when we would be doing this, we wouldn't be trying to meet a requirement in the landscape element. That's talking about specifically buffers. If it's in a perimeter buffer or a streetscape buffer, it does define it that way. And if TCA is in those areas, we would have to meet that requirement. If TCA is somewhere outside of that area, then it would meet this requirement. So it's not true.
I think it's very small.
Because riparian buffers are made, have plenty of trees that are 2 inches and under. But we're not trying to, but 2 inches is a.
So for
And it's, and again,
Tree.
I'm sorry,
I
apologize,
feel
I
like
stepped
that's
on
a
your
very
words.
small number. If we're taking out a large canopy tree, then 2 inches is too small. I think that number needs to be higher.
Item, or page 12, 7. Item 7, the second line from the end of the first paragraph. I would like to substitute dimensions that average not with the words no dimension. So it will read.
Let me make sure I'm.
Section 7.
Section 7, the
Yeah.
red paragraph.
The first paragraph, second to the bottom, second line at the bottom. It says,
It's dimensions that average not less than 25 feet.
right, I would like it to say, has no dimension less than 25 feet.
So you're taking out the
Averaging.
The averaging is really what you're asking.
Right. Page 14. I'm unsure about items N and O, what they constitute, what they mean.
The red and.
Yeah, the red N and the blue O. Item 2, I think needs to respond to, that there's just a minor glitch where there's an item inserted in the list of 1, and it became item D, which kicked all the letters down, but then item 2, referencing those letters, didn't keep up. So there's an I and a J, and it should be J and K.
Got it.
And then my last thought, comment is on page 15, strike item 12.1. No, because that's the point. It can be an open space.
I guess the question is.
It's somewhat redundant.
Open
Yeah.
space is part of the agreement. That it required open space.
Well, I wouldn't want to limit it to just required open space. If it's only 1,320 acres is required, it could be more than that.
But I think this goes back to what we're saying is a park. Because there's no designation between park and protected forest. It's all considered open space, and parks are own open space.
No, parks are not part of open space. It's a separate line item.
Separate 667 acres.
But that fits along the same line, but that takes up a lot of the CCTA requirements. 600 acres.
That's not part of
Okay, so you're saying.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm saying that TCA can be an open space.
Right.
But open space cannot be defined by TCA.
Michael, you want to give me a little clarification on that? You're saying that an open space does not meet the requirement?
It would, in another.
It says it meets the requirements of this element. In number 2.
Open space, right, that meets the requirements of this element may constitute TCA. So open space has other dimensional characteristics to it that exceed the dimensional characteristics of TCA. Therefore, it can fit in open space. But but I did not
Did
want...
we set a minimum, don't we have some open space that's allowed with that 20-foot dimension? Because we have perimeter buffers, I think, that are part of open space that would be 20 feet. And
The outer 20 feet?
Right, and well, not the outer 20 feet, but there could be a 20-foot buffer along a small McDonald's out parcel.
Well, that's the one acre parcel.
Well, we're not talking TCA, we're talking open space. So there are open space, I think there are open space categories that are allowed with a dimension less than 25 feet. We haven't talked about that in a while, so I could be wrong. I was trying to support your statement that if it met open space and it was less than 25 feet, it couldn't meet TCA.
Right.
It has to meet the TCA standards to meet TCA, even if it is open space.
Yes. It meets both standards.
Right.
One of the letters we received suggested questioning how we would enforce what the consequences would be if someone does not, if the requirements are not met. And the suggestion was to create a performance bond to cover. And I don't know much about performance bonds, but it sounds like an interesting idea. And we discuss that as a possibility.
So when are you saying they wouldn't be met? On day one?
I'm not saying anything. This was something that was suggested in the letter. It's not something that I can't take credit for coming up with this. Anybody else?
I'd be curious to explore the idea.
What is the
Is
bond?
that like an incentive? Like an incentive? No.
Yeah, we can't address it unless we understand what you mean.
What is the bond to protect against?
If requirements are not met.
When are they not met?
During construction.
Well, they won't get a CO.
You won't get a CO.
Right.
Or it could be up to after construction. It could be.
Perpetuity?
You can't have a bond
I don't know
forever.
anything about bonds. I'm just offering that up.
Gentlemen, Mr. Messick, is it correct that bonds are required to complete the requirement of a particular kind of work, for example, on a roadway?
Well, you could have a performance bond, but you could also have a maintenance bond in the future too. But, for the stormwater, it'll have requirements for that sort of thing. But for trees, I'm not sure that's appropriate or doable either for that matter.
Might be other ways around that. I believe the special assessment district the law does allow for certain maintenance activities. Maybe not even certain, I think it's a range of maintenance activities.
This will be essentially private property with trees on it that will have met some kind of standard that you all have established at final plat approval. And if the trees die, lightning strikes, and the threshold limit is less, are you saying that private property owners are going to be required to build back up to the standard? Is that what you want to do?
I think that's intriguing. I think we see municipalities nationwide grappling with this subject of replacing their natural capital.
Okay.
And it has value. It delivers services. We are beginning to understand and quantify those services in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of clean air, even stormwater attenuation. So
It'd be like maintaining sidewalks.
It's valuable.
It's maintaining.
Valuable infrastructure.
Maintaining.
But you're basically talking about doing this with your UDO.
Potentially the UDO and this language.
Yeah, well, I'm saying
I hope this is a conversation.
Oh, sure. No, I mean, I'm trying to understand. 35 years from now, when we're gone, and lightning strikes, as Mr. Messick suggests, we're not there to be the ones responsible as the individual property owner. So, it's any individual property owner in Pittsboro that you're saying would be responsible for restoring their tree.
You had a bond that was set aside.
You're not going to have a bond that goes forever like that. If it's in HOA land, they are required to maintain the land.
Well, and I think this document talks about the owner being responsible for maintaining the tree protected area.
Yeah, I think it's in that table of fees for the allowed disturbances within the.
Yeah.
And it does say at the end of that, if I'm not mistaken, it says at the end of that.
Well, I also think that if we were to have something in the UDO to talk about, taking trees that are there to serve a purpose, either a tree coverage area designation or a buffer designation requirement, that it's a zoning violation. And there could be remedies established for that. I mean, for the willful act. I mean, lightning, I don't think you can do that.
But it presumably would be uniform throughout your jurisdiction and not just at Chatham Park.
Correct.
And so you'll be telling all property owners they have to maintain some standard. That's a difficult thing for you all to do.
I think it would be that standard that was established on a permitted project. Right.
So if it was outside the purview of a subdivision, then there would or would not be enforcement.
Has approval. Commercial development has approval requirement and has probably a buffer and street tree requirement. And if the project willfully destroys that tree, foliage, whatever, then I would think that the town could say that is a zoning violation. You must replant.
Further questions for Chuck Smith? Was it your suggestion that we dedicate the first part of the month, the third Monday in March?
Well, is that our next UDO session would be?
Yes.
Okay.
To discuss this particular element or this element as fixed with the UDO requirements, which you're urging us to make sure that they mesh well.
Right. I think we could talk about the UDO, but I think your goal is to figure out this element.
Yeah.
And not the UDO at the moment.
Further questions for Chuck Smith? Then you want to make that motion?
Sure. What's the date?
18th.
I move that we take this up in a special workshop on March 18th. And I think we can schedule that for 6 o'clock until, we managed to go until 8:30 last time, but
Thank you.
And I would ask that everybody be prepared for that work session.
Motion by John Bonnet, seconded by Pat Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our old business is the bicycle pedestrian plan update with Joe Fromm.
I got one question. Before we have this work session, do we have an updated agreement?
That would be a good question for Chatham Park. I don't think they're going to update the element. It is what it is, and they're noting comments that are being made tonight and elsewhere.
I think they.
Yeah, they'll get it. Okay, good. All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the board. This is an update on the grant for a new bicycle and pedestrian plan that the town was awarded last year, and we're getting started. March 7th is when we kick off the meeting. In your packet, it includes the scope of service that DOT and Alta Planning, that was the firm that was selected. They're out of Durham. DOT is administering this project for us. We're going to be Why don't I just take it? Why don't we just take it?
Take a 5 minute break.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that, Mayor. Good here.
Shall we come back into order? Is there a motion to come back into regular session? Moved by John Bonnet, seconded by Michael Piocca. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, so we're back in session and continuing with Jeff Jones on the site head plan.
So this is a good thing. The town was awarded a grant, 9% matching grant from the NCDOT to get an updated bicycle and pedestrian plan. And so we're taking some time to, that was last spring that we were awarded that grant. It's taking a little bit of time for DOT to work out their contractual issues with their consultants, and we've gotten all those things worked out, and DOT selected Alta Planning out of Durham, and they're going to be leading our planning effort. And we are going to have a kickoff meeting with the committee, and you'll see the committee list that was included in your packet. Casey Hilliard with Chatham County Public Health Department really took this on, and she contacted all these folks who expressed interest in being on our steering committee. And I'm thankful that she helped us out with that, and all these folks from anywhere from the Health Alliance, Council on Aging, Police Department, Safe Kids Coalition, Active Council Schools, the library, all those folks have agreed to be on our steering committee for the bicycle and pedestrian plan, and we're going to have a kickoff meeting on March 7th here at Town Hall at 10 o'clock. And if one of you all would like to join us, we can certainly put you on the email list and have you join us on the 10th or the 7th, rather. And you'll see I also included the scope of work between NCDOT and Alta Planning, and we got a little later start, so the timeline that you see in there has the plan wrapping up sometime in September. I think we probably could still meet that September deadline, but it's probably going to be September or October time frame. But that's the update. We're getting started, and I just got a big email from Stephen, who is working with us from Alta, of things he needs from me and my department to get started. So I'm going to have to work on that tomorrow. And I'm very excited to get this plan updated.
I'm excited too, and I really wish I could be there March 7th, but I'll be traveling.
Okay. Well, even if you can't be there March 7th and you want to be a part of the committee, there's going to be several more times, either as a committee or as a public function, that you could participate in. And if your fellow board members wanted to nominate you and select you to be their representative, I could be.
I don't want to presume that.
Yeah.
Precious little time that I have outside of these.
We'll keep you plugged in. We'll keep you plugged in as much as we can. Yeah.
I can pop in there.
Yeah. No, we'll keep you up to date as the new and the website as the new dates for steering committee meetings and public events that we'll have.
Yeah, what's the study area?
It includes all of our planning jurisdiction. Beforehand, our current Fed plan, bike plan, didn't go as far out as Chatham Park, and that's really what I want to make sure we have good connections between Chatham Park and Pittsburgh today.
People are so excited about the bike trail. Like when you talk about the
Yeah,
bike trail.
yeah. Well, this will be a fun project to work on and get everybody excited about bicycle and pedestrian routes.
There were a couple of gentlemen that I was on Transportation Advisory Board to the county who are avid cyclists.
Why don't you send me their, I'll plug them in.
I can make a suggestion too. It's actually my brother-in-law. He is national level back roads bicycle racer, and he knows everything. He used to run a shop. He loves.
We'd love to have him on the committee. Please send me
He
information.
doesn't live in Pittsburgh. Does that matter?
No, that's okay.
I was thinking maybe we want Eddie Patrick with us to the bicycle shop.
Yes. Okay. I'll walk down there, talk to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mary Perry, do you recall the proposal from Catacombs? Friend of Suzanne's?
I need to
Okay.
go back and look at that.
Well, the two of us have received a proposal from Catacombs, Integrated Planning and Policy Consultants, who is very eager to find a way she's an academic, and she does a very small amount of consulting on the side. She's very eager to find a way to work with us to be sure that we're doing the absolute best from climate, from transportation, from health, from all these different perspectives in the bike ped plan. And it's a very modest proposal, and I have wondered if it's something that you might consider for your sustainability budget, or actually climate change program.
I recall that, and it was about 1,500 pages or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then maybe we could look at that, and she would consult with the committee. Is that right?
Yes, I think that.
Yeah, so we've already got the health department doing an add-on for a health assessment of Pittsburgh. She's working with also planning for that. This would be another add-on. Those things have to be approved by the state. And so I'd be more than happy to look at.
Means DOT has to approve?
Yeah. I don't want to duplicate services.
I don't think it's a duplication.
Okay.
So the one thing that's left out of me, and I'm not a planner obviously, so I'm not steeped in this subject matter, but a methodological approach called the STAR analysis for transportation planning, multimodal transportation. So maybe we could.
But that doesn't mean that Alta Planning, who we've already hired and spent $4,000 on, might be. I mean, if there's ideas that you want us to explore, I need to know those so I can report to Alta. But I don't. I mean, they may know that.
I will circulate an email.
Yeah, do that.
Board and staff and hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk to Alta as well. Okay, great.
Thank you. Any other further questions for Jeff? Then we're next into the ordinance to amend the capital budget for Town Hall. Brian Brucebeck will discuss that with us.
Thank you. Back in November of 2017, just to add a little context, you had approved a contract with Hobbs Architects for Phase 1 design services for the new Town Hall. Since that time, Hobbs completed that pre-design work after multiple meetings with staff, county staff, with the town board, during meetings and workshops. And they developed the Phase 1 report that you had reviewed and then ultimately approved a few weeks ago. And I think it was maybe the last meeting or the meeting before that, approved the construction budget, which provided the basics of the town hall and what the town hall's construction budget would cost, which took into account the 40,000 square foot building, all the accoutrements and work to this point. At this stage, we are looking at beginning Phase 2 standard design, which would take us through the nuts and bolts design of the town hall. and would also lead us right up to basically right up to and ultimately through the construction phase. You have in your packet attached to my memo you have in the memo attached in the packet attached to my memo a document called Attachment D, Design Amendment to the contracts that you approved back in 2017, and the figure that you see up at the top is the total construction. That represents the total construction estimate that you had authorized as a framework during, like I said, I don't remember whether it was the last meeting or the meeting before that. I apologize. The design services are outlined within that, which would begin with the schematic design, continuing on through to actual design development, and then development of construction documents, all the way through bidding and the construction phase. And then I'll skip down to the timeline. The estimated schedule for that would be that you would have the design taking a total of approximately 10 months, another month for bidding, and then approximately 15 months for construction. So there's obviously quite a bit of work to do, and that's what phase 2 will be. As you recall, the contract would call, at least initially at this point, for a construction estimate of $15 million. Design work in phase 2 would be approximately 10% of that $15 million, which gets us to the proposed $1.5 million figure for phase 2 design services. You have also attached to my memo the ordinance which would amend the capital project budget for the town hall project, and that essentially creates the wherewithal for us to do it. Recall that we, in the past, I think for phase 1 had previously approved the amount that covered phase 1 pre-design services. For that, this would carve out the money from our general fund balance for the phase 2 design services. So we are at a very important stage. We're looking really to begin this work in earnest. There's still more presentations, meetings, and conversations that we have with you guys before we are completed with this. We also would look forward to meetings with the public as this project moves forward. As you're aware, and we'll get to that on the next agenda item, we currently are in process now with demolition of the existing structure that's on site. And as you can tell, that's moving along quite well. We have in our audience tonight really the guys that make all the magic happen, architects. I don't know if I've covered everything at this point. But essentially, tonight, I'm asking you for two things within this agenda item, which is one, to authorize the ordinance to amend the capital project budget as presented, and then also to execute the contract amendment for phase 2 design services. With that, definitely be interested in any comments, questions, concerns that you guys might have for us this evening.
Questions?
We know about the eventual plan of the project. Have we made an application at this point for that? Or?
Well, I'll take you back to the schedule. Essentially, what we would be doing is going through over the course of the next 10 months, and Hobbs would be working in earnest with us on the design. Essentially, before we get to the bidding portion down here at the end of that 10-month time period, we would either have to have a firm idea of the financing mechanism that we would be using to that point, or we would not proceed without a preferred financing mechanism before we move forward. So nothing can happen until we determine financing during this design period. So during this 10-month period, then we would be working with our financial advisor to come up with the appropriate product to finance the town hall. It could include any number of options or a combination of options. And they, Ted Cole from Davenport Associates, they have the Phase 1 report. They previously, before we actually even purchased the property, were doing some schedules and some mock-ups and coming up with some options for us on what we thought or considered to be sort of the parameters of a possible town hall on site. So they're familiar with what we need to do. It's getting them now busy given the schedule and given the construction budget that we've outlined. So we've got our work to do on that as well.
Very good. Questions?
I have one recommendation for the contract. It talks about billing on a phased methodology, and it would be helpful if we had the percentages represented for schematic design, design development, and construction documents. It says it totals 65%, but it'd be nice to know what those milestones are and bill against it accordingly. That'd be my only recommendation.
All right. Any other questions?
So this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I'm aware that Duke Energy has financial incentives for rooftop solar, and those in recent years have been completely exhausted, except for the category for municipalities and nonprofits. So in other words, Duke Money has left money on the table every one of the past 3 years, I think, because there have been inadequate numbers of applicants for rooftop solar for municipalities. And I would urge us to pursue this as best we can in that direction. I've submitted some very preliminary rough stuff to colleagues at the Solar Center, NC State University's Clean Energy Technology Center is the proper name where I work now. I'm not on that team, but the team that does this analysis, I've presented to them some really basic stuff to ask them to present an estimate, a budget estimate for a very small piece of work that would be a feasibility analysis. So we can understand whether or not it would even make sense to put it on the rooftop and what kind of years return on investment we might get. Before any of us make an investment, we want to know how quickly our money's getting paid back. So that's what I'm asking them to give a very rough idea of incorporating the solar grant from Duke Energy, but also without that. So I just want everybody to be aware of that there will be an estimate coming forward, and somehow I'll throw that into the pot and we can stir it around and see what comes out.
All right. Are we ready for a motion?
Motion to approve the ordinance amending the capital project budget for Town Hall.
Second.
Motion by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Beth Moses Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. And our final item of old business is the demolition.
Did we need another motion to sign the contract?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make a motion to allow execution of the contract with the additional information of breaking down the design fee into schematic design development and construction documents.
Second. By Michael Fiocco, seconded by Pamela Ball.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, demolition is currently underway. You recall from previous conversation when we had, I think, authorized D.H. Griffin to begin work removing the building. We discussed what the ultimate fate of the concrete slab would be with regards to allowing it to be used for parking. We're at the stage right now with D.H. Griffin where they're getting down to removing. As you can tell, they've got quite a bit of debris to remove yet, but we're getting right down to the stage where we got to make a decision on how we want to treat that slab. When we had originally approved that demolition project, we authorized an overall project cost of $178,650. But we did ultimately agree to look at what we would do with the bid or with the concrete base before we completed the project. So Hobbs Architects broke the project down to an essential base bid of $58,950 for the demolition removals of the walls and the roofing. So that takes everything out up to the floor. They provided an estimate or a quote to if we were able to and preferred to keep the concrete slab, provided an estimate of $30,000 to roughen the concrete surface, install some tire bumpers for parking, possibly some additional work along the walls for ingress, egress, and then we would reserve the remainder of the budget, the remainder of that, whatever's left from that starting point, $650 would be reserved for removing the pad in advance of construction. So, in so many words, what we're asking tonight is if you would like to provide some direction to either process a change order, which would allow the slab to remain in place with the recommended treatments, or two, just go ahead and continue with the demolition of complete structure. So if you go ahead with demolition of complete structure, that would essentially include taking out the concrete base, total cost of $178,650. Or if you were to wanted to allow the slab to remain in place, we would have the base bid at $58,950 plus the $30,000 to do the work to the concrete slab. And then we would still have that money left over then to essentially take out the slab before we began construction of the new building, began work on site. Clear as mud. It's kind of late at night.
I agree with that.
Or you might recommend. I'm going to recommend that we roughen up the slab. That's going to be $90,000 that we can now pay Hobbs Architects as opposed to removing the slab and allow removal of the slab to be financed into the bigger project.
Hear that? Did everyone hear that?
Well, I'm just sort of astounded because I thought that roughing up the concrete was going to be, some very reasonable little figure, that it was not going to be anything near $30,000. I think we could all get in there with a Brillo pad and just do great things with it, but
I'm charging $30,000.
To me, it just makes sense just to get it done, just go ahead and remove it, and then it seems like that might benefit the architect too. I know that, but to get it out of the way, why spend that extra money?
Taylor, do you have a recommendation?
Put you on the spot.
Well, when we gave you the bid the recommendation was to remove everything. So that was the official recommendation as of a month ago. So that was where we stood. But we didn't have the numbers. We have the change order now. But that was the official recommendation, was to remove the back with gravel.
Mr. Hobbs, if we remove the slab, would the fence remain over that, around that area where the gravel is?
That's not the current plan. The current plan was park on the gravel.
But the rest of it's going to be gravel, is that correct?
No, the asphalt
It's
setting.
asphalt.
The
It'll just
asphalt.
be gravel in that one
It will
spot.
be gravel basically in the building footprint area. And it would touch up the asphalt.
The other concern I've got is that the material that would be in there is going to have fines in it, and fines being like, it could erode and go into the street, and big park.
It could.
I mean, there's the potential of that, so.
Do we know about the surface below the slab? Whether or not there's a grade change of any sort between like the asphalt right outside the concrete sidewalk at the front sweep of the grocery?
We don't know. What's in the contract is to remove the slabs and the footings and compact back for a solid surface with gravel. So that we have in the contract that would be a seamless, but it would be the same elevation as the slab.
Okay.
Right now, there's 4-inch slab that steps up, and there's a 6-inch slab that steps up. So part of that $30,000 is to treat the perimeter with some, it's yet to be determined, some kind of ramping system.
Yeah.
So,
Asphalt, maybe.
asphalt or something.
Allow.
That's estimated at around 10,000. We won't know that exact number until everything's gone and we see exactly what you have. But the estimate of that's around 10,000 of the 30.
So what period of time would there be between the time that the concrete pad is ready to be parked on and when it would be taken down anyway? What's the time frame? How much-
Well, it depends on when that would. I think you're asking when would the real project start? So, well, it can happen with
About a year?
Yeah, about a year.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out whether it would be worth the investment of spending the extra $30,000.
Yeah, I mean it would be it would
months of fancy parking for 3 months.
We haven't had that parking anyway.
Nicer parking. We haven't had the parking.
That's right. Yeah.
And
That's a benefit.
Well, yeah,
I think that's not
it would be
really
nice to have
nice, but-
more parking, but I think that I've heard scuttlebutt around town, I can't remember who it was, but I feel like I heard on the street that, no, we hadn't even filled out that parking as it is.
It's on Facebook. You can find it.
Okay. So,
Yeah, that parking's pretty much occupied all day. I'm not really sure when Facebook is required.
the entire lot is filled?
Really?
What's not
Over the
fenced?
tanks?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, but that's the fence, but when the fence is gone, that's when the fence.
I make several trips by there. I've not seen it full, and not to disrespect or anything, but I've not seen it full. I even saw a gentleman today sitting in his truck watching the demolition going on for several minutes.
It's kind of addictive.
Yeah. Yeah. But I haven't. Yeah. Of course, I know it's probably been a little busier with D.H. Griffin's vehicles there too, and the fence taking up a lot, but
I tell you, let's put it this way. If we closed off that parking, you guys would be getting phone calls.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I mean, we can count the number of spots.
We're gonna have to close it off for construction.
it's not gonna be closed off if we take the slab up, right?
No, I'm sorry. All I was trying to say was people have kind of gotten used to being able to park there. And so if we were just hypothetically to close that entire parking area off and not allow any parking, people would be upset. So we can talk about how many people are parking there on an hour-to-hour or daily basis or whatever, but the fact of the matter is that people are parking. And so it's just a matter of how nice do we want the extra parking to be. And we can go either direction on this. We just need your guys' preference on it.
I recall from the earlier numbers we were looking at that this option is an additional cost to the project. And I'm already feeling some pressure and concern about the project and eager for us to explore grants and every low-cost financing option we can get. But I'm in favor of us proceeding without roughening the existing slab for interior parking. So, Michael, I appreciate your advocacy. I appreciate your thinking outside the box, but I think we need to proceed with it. And go ahead and take out the slab.
I make a motion that we remove the slab.
Second.
Moved by Beth Wilson, Foley, seconded by Jamie Harrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Paul Messick, for your memo regarding vacant and neglected commercial buildings. I'm not sure if we are looking at commercial or residential. I've sort of made a little list of the ones that I was concerned about, and there's 2 of each. So I think we need to sort of polish up our concerns and then be back with you on.
Yep, that'd be good.
Commissioners,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mayor. I didn't follow that transaction.
Well, the attachment that he gave us stated that there were 2 separate theories and thoughts about commercial versus residential. And at one time, as I recall, Paul Messick, you said that there was greater concern anytime you're taking, appear to be taking residential property.
Right, now, the town has a minimum housing code that is, it's out of date probably, because it's 30 years old and not ever been enforced. So that could be, modernized, and that would deal with dilapidated housing that would be capable of being repaired and used. So if that's your concern, then that ought to be on the table. If you're concerned about commercial buildings, then the minimum housing code doesn't have anything to do with those. So depending on what level of the status of the building that's set forth on the chart, we can address those if you're concerned about that. So.
Well, the Matisse Clinic is the only one I can think of right now, besides possibly the motel at the top of the hill.
Bait shop.
Oh, the bait shop. Yeah, the bait shop. Although that could be considered
Residential.
Well, I don't know how.
Commercial, residential.
Well,
Mixed use.
Mixed use. Vertical too. I heard there's a basement.
Right.
Have you all really been in it?
Now I remember when it was Chicken Shack, and it was a wonderful place to have food. And,
Good memories.
Right, Jay?
Big ball.
You had good Hazel's Chicken Shack.
Yeah, I remember that. Hazel Church.
She did. So, are we ready to go to Commissioner's concerns now?
I have just one. I have had several comments from people coming in about several of the residences on Main Street.
Yes.
One of them up above the old hotel. That place was completely destroyed inside, and the old Atlas Boone house. Both of them I don't think are repairable.
I was just working with the Alice Boone property.
Good.
They say it's got great bones, so they're going to reuse it.
Fantastic.
Take it whenever you
No,
they'll fix it up.
make something else. I'm
Yay.
surprised it hasn't started, honestly, because I heard about that 6 months ago.
Next time you French Connection. Next to French Connection. That's very good.
Yeah, I'm surprised that could be salvaged.
And Dan Deacon apparently has been working with our planning staff. So that is actually on the way.
So then the Lost Drawing building is open for this.
Mhm.
I didn't know about that. I'm letting you check it out.
I don't believe I have any. Well, I did have one thing. Pam and I had talked about last Monday during this UDO meeting. Several concerns came up regarding the zoning, and I was a little confused with Jeff on a couple of things. I meant to speak to him about, but we're going over this UDO, and then we're having all these zoning issues come forward. Are we putting the cart before the horse, or the cart vice versa? I mean, I'm just concerned that this zoning is gonna come back like it did with this concrete plant, the Eagles. Should we not be working to get our zoning a little more compatible with what the town wants?
Well, I think that's why he keeps going to the land use plan. I think what I've heard Joe say is we need to focus on the big picture land use plan and get all of our vision and perspective and hopes for how the town will be shaped as a whole. And then when we define that as a vision, as a land use plan, then that would inform the individual rezonings. And Mr. Grusbeck is nodding his head. Good sign. And so
I like me sleeping.
But yeah, Commissioner Baldwin and Commissioner Fiocco, and hey, were you involved also in the last meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, you were. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So how does that unfold? Is that your understanding?
Typically, yeah, your zoning would reflect the land use plan.
Because you all have to determine that it's consistent with your land use plan.
So we would only change it to zoning with the land use plan that we feel needs updating in very unusual situations where it's an urgent case. And I think we did that with crematoria, future crematoria. Is that
the downtown overlay? Right.
Yeah. Does that address where you're going, Commissioner Farrell? Or are you feeling
I just feel like maybe we're going to have some more properties that's going to be coming out closer to some residential areas that are there now that may be improperly zoned.
Just to add to what Commissioner Farrell was saying, for example, the Cobblestone and the concrete plant. Right behind Cobblestone, it would be that we should have went on and rezoned that. So
light industrial or something, transition rather than residential to heavy industrial.
Yes. So that it doesn't be that close to a residential area. So I think that's what, and that's what we talked about, looking at different areas that we may want to rezone, and look at the land use plan, of course, to change it or update it. Because there are some areas which you may not want to see certain things in because it is close to a neighborhood. It could be close to a school. It could be close to overlay. So that's what we were talking about. And I think that's so. And Commissioner Farrell was also saying basically, if we do the UDO first, and then we're going to go back to okay, we want to rezone this now. Why not at least look at the rezoning particular areas in the same time that we're looking at the UDO and the land use plan also, try to look at it all together. I know that's a big
another work night.
But it would be an option, or at least maybe sometime when we get ready to do the UDO, go back to looking at that. Maybe we can look at some areas or pinpoint some areas in town which we are interested in or which are of concern.
I think that's a good point to raise about the schools. Yeah, we do need to look at that.
Another approach would be to, in the UDO, create regulations that are more palatable for having those mixes adjacent to each other.
That's a good point. In other words, you change your rules for development in a heavy industrial zone such that if it was to residential, it would have to have
exercise
additional buffers or
building setbacks and those kind of things. So you could do
which
that.
wouldn't help with the current concrete plant, but might help with the next project proposal adjacent to the concrete plant.
Because we want to remember that, honestly, you'll hear the EDC say, the tax revenue in the county is 92% residential.
Yeah,
We've got to get commercial, we've got to get some industrial. So that means we've got to make places for them. So just
We don't have any industrial places.
No, we don't. And I remember the folks at Potterstone said, why don't one of the very first meetings I ever sat in this chair, that I can't believe you guys let us build a subdivision next to a chicken plant. Which I thought was ironic. There was something.
Commissioner Farrell, how do we address your concern?
That's a good question.
And Commissioner Baldwin, I very much appreciate you bringing up the concerns around Waterstone and Moncur, Pittsburgh Road. I think there may be other instances that escape my attention. But that really is.
Michael made a good point regarding that in the UDO, to add that in.
Yeah,
It's a good option.
There was some talk about like Jim Jones would get an intern. Does he have an intern? Because that would be a good project for someone to just look through the land use plan and see where the problem might be.
Victoria's very good at the GIS. Yeah, I just feel like they've got so much going on.
So that Andrew and Victoria do in GIS.
Okay.
Problem area.
Okay, we,
The trees downtown are all in.
No, I've already talked about it, except one thing. Triangle J is Wednesday, and I thought it was my alternate want to go.
Oh, this Wednesday? We'll talk about that.
That's all. Okay.
John?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Jones, Mr. Griesbeck, could we get an update at the next meeting on the evacuation route and what's been done for the next 4 days?
Evacuation routes 15501, Hillsborough.
Powell Place? Powell Place.
Oh, Powell Place, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I can answer this. Well, I should let you go first. But,
Go ahead.
I had a neighbor who sent me a list of questions and forwarded it to Jeff and Brian, and I guess Brian, Jeff was instructed to answer, and he actually sent me some answers, so I can send it.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, yeah, that's going back a week or two. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But if there's any more updates, then
We'll do. Yep.
Yeah, I'd just like to make sure that we're still making headway on that, because...
And what has to be done in Powell Place, and I spoke with Edward, and he said that he was going to hold a community meeting before construction started on those already started. I haven't heard anything about it.
Well, good. I'm glad he said he's going to do that.
Yeah. I think that's
And Brian, if you could find out when we could get that graphical depiction of our remaining sewer allocation, on how that's going to change in the near future. I know Elizabeth Goodson has got an awful lot on her plate, but I feel really nervous about us this board needing to understand that in the context of all the policies we're contemplating. Finish.
well, there being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn? I forgive the move.
Second.
Jay Carroll, second. Thank you.